Today is Friday, August 16th, 2024, and I will call this meeting of the Texas Appraiser Licensing and Certification Board to order. It is 9:02 a.m., a very small delay for technical issues, which we don't have often, so we certainly appreciate all the hard work you guys do. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and Mr. Castro will lead us. We will now move to roll call.
Chair Sarah Oates.
Present.
Martha Gale Reed-Lynch. Present. Mark McAnally.
Present.
Chance Bolton.
Present.
Yolanda Castro.
Present.
Michael Berger.
Present.
Paula Escalante-Castillo.
Present.
Stephanie Robinson.
Present.
Lisa Spring.
Present.
Full house today. Thank you, everyone, for being present in this humid August day. Opening remarks. So I wanted to note that we will move agenda item number 28, the presentation by Pearson View. We will move that to before executive session agenda item number 13 so that that they don't have to wait for us through the whole meeting. The mission moment is quick today. We'll just take one moment to note that the mission is to get through this hefty agenda as efficiently as possible. We thought that we had somebody who wanted to make a public comment today, but I don't believe that they're here. If they do come later, I know, Austin traffic is kind of unpredictable, so we will make time for them, but there is nobody presently that has asked to speak. Agenda item number 5 is the ratification of the official record of the May 10th meeting as approved for posting on the website by the Secretary of the Board, and this was included as a supplemental item. If there are no changes, I will hear a motion.
Madam Chair, I move ratification of the official record of May 10th, 2024 Board meeting.
We have a motion by Mr. McAnally and a second by Mr. Bolton. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 6 is the final order and surrender in the matter of complaint 24032. This is on page 8 in our materials. This doesn't require any action by the board, but certainly if there's any discussion or questions. Moving on to agenda item number 7, our committee reports. First is the report by the Enforcement Committee. It starts on page 17 in our materials. Mr. Bolton, was there anything that you wanted to highlight for us?
I think that the report, thank you, speaks for itself. Yeah, I think we're
Very good. Thank you, sir. Agenda item number 8 is the report by the Executive Committee. It's on page 20 in our report. The only thing I would sort of point to that is we talked about the MOU, which we will see those changes and discuss those further in agenda item number 21. If there are no further questions, we will move to the report by Education and Licensing on page 22 in our materials. Mr. Castro or any committee members, if you have anything you'd like to highlight for us.
No, I just think just as a note and something that we discussed is our first person that has from Texas that has gone through the Perea program successfully. So that's something to take note of, and yeah, so that's a good thing, and hopefully something that continues on at least for other members of our aspiring appraising community that are wanting to take that path, that it is possible for them. So
Yeah. And kind of along those same lines, I did want to make sure that that I recognized that communications, that there was a coordination by staff to interview that gentleman that was the first Perea graduate. And I thought it was just a great thing to add to our newsletter. It's hard to kind of find things for our newsletters that aren't an opinion and aren't pushing any kind of agenda, that are informative, but not controversial in any kind of way, to stay within our lane. And I thought that was a great article, and I really appreciate the thought of putting that out there and highlighting that. So thank you to the communications for that. Agenda item number 10 is the report by the Budget and Finance Committee on pages 25 and 26. They met twice in the interim. Ms. Robinson.
Yes, ma'am. So we did meet twice in July and August. We've had a lot of things that we are going to have a robust discussion on that I'm super excited about. The committee and staff has worked extremely hard to prepare some things for the board to review. Specifically, we're looking at the 2025 fiscal year budget that we'll talk about and discuss that, as well as changes to our existing budget policy and investment policy. So everything else is pretty straightforward, but looking forward to the discussion on that.
Well, we certainly appreciate that. I know that this time of year, it's a lot of work for that committee, so we certainly appreciate the time and effort you all have put in. Agenda item number 11 is the report by the Trek and Talc Joint Audit Committee. This is on page 28 in our materials. So I did want to mention a couple of things as we near the end of my term, because this will have to be, someone else will need to be, serve on this committee. We did ask for a list of all of the items that have been audited in the past, because that's not something I think that I had ever seen, and I just didn't really know how we sort of pick the next items. One thing that came to my attention that I wasn't aware of before is that every other year by statute, we have to audit the public funds investment. Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ms. Williams. Public Funds Investment Act. And so that takes a significant amount of our audit time and audit budget. We will be in executive session today discussing the results of the IT audit. And when I sort of went back, again, because I didn't have this historical list, trying to figure out when is the last time that we audited IT, obviously that's something that we need to be auditing on a regular basis, certainly, and as the years go on and things get a little bit crazier and cyber attacks and that sort of thing. And it came to my attention that because of that public funds requirement, it kind of leaves us, because we have sort of a set budget for auditing. And I just want to make sure that the board knows going forward that if there are times when, like, IT needs to be audited or finance needs to be audited, that we make room in the budget, that we don't just stick with what, here's our budget and, we're going to audit something simple because we don't have enough left over after we've done public funds. I don't want that to be our policy. I think, we want to make sure that we're hitting the big things on a regular basis. And certainly not ever ignoring the small things either, but I just want to make sure that I think that that's important for whoever is the next person on the audit committee, and for all of us as board members to make sure that we pay attention to going forward. Obviously, we only have a certain amount of information, and these audits are crucial to, our oversight and to making sure that they're digging in where we can't. So I think that they're important, and I want to make sure that if that ever comes up as a budgetary item, that I sort of have given you all this background. And we did sort of discuss with the Trek members, possibly in the years that we have to do the public funds, maybe putting a little bit more money in the budget for auditing. Any other questions on that? Very good. We will move to staff reports, agenda item number 12. These start on page 31 in your materials. Not Commissioner, Executive Director Buckholz.
Good morning. This is an interesting time of year. I know it's a season of transition for many of us. I put my daughter on the school bus this morning. We started this week. Others start next week. I know some of you are sending children to college, and so you're in the middle of that transition. So there's a lot going on personally, I know, and there's a lot going on at the board as well. So let me give you a few highlights and just comment on a few items of the agenda. First, I have to start with acknowledging Tony Slagle. This is his last board meeting with us. Next Friday, he will retire from state government. He's going to take a little bit of time for himself before figuring out what his next thing is, but we will not let him leave without celebrating him. As an agency, we will do that next Friday, his last day. But today, I just wanted to say a few things about him, hopefully not embarrassing him too much. He was one of the first people I met at the agency, and I was the new general counsel for the commission. He was the executive director or deputy executive director for the commission and deputy commissioner for the board. And it did not take me long to learn that he's quirky. He declared very early on that he was a vegan every other month. And I thought that was really fascinating. I never met anyone like that. But I also learned that he was incredibly knowledgeable about the inner workings of the agency, how the board and the commission interacted, who does what, all the different nuances. He could explain things to me and help me get on board quickly. I very quickly claimed him as a friend and was so grateful for all that he poured into the agency that then he imparted to me. A few of his major accomplishments, he was a significant driver and leader in affecting change during what was a very hard sunset review around 2018, 2019. He dove deep into our challenges and found solutions and was specifically and especially helpful in improving our customer service. I'm really grateful for that work. He applied his vast knowledge in the legislative process, which is something he has done his entire career, and helped our agency navigate many sessions year after year. He's been here 12 years, so I think he's done 6 sessions with us. He acted as a liaison for many advisory committees and became an expert on their work and became a trusted worker, really, of those committees and within the industries that we serve. He's also a champion for consumer protection. He's always the first to raise that issue and to help us remember how the decisions we make affect the end users of those that we license. So when I became the executive director and commissioner for the board, he coached me all along the way, and it was an easy decision to keep him in the spot that he was in. The thing that touches me most about Tony is that he works with his heart. He's driven by his heart. So I look forward to continuing to know Tony, to continue claiming him as a friend, but just want to thank him for all that he's given to this agency and for all of the ways that he's personally helped me succeed. So thank you, Tony. Did anyone else want to say anything before I move on?
I did, thank you. And certainly if anybody else has anything to add, you're more than welcome to. I just wanted to say kind of on behalf of the board that we certainly appreciate your dedicated service. I too have known you since my early days here, back in my AMC committee days. And I found you to always be a consummate professional with a positive demeanor. And your updates are always concise without being overwhelming. I feel like we have an immense amount of trust in you for exactly the reasons that Executive Director Buckholt said, that we could tell that you had really taken on the problems and figured out a way to do it. And when you come to us and say, here are the metrics that show where we are and how we've improved, you can tell that there's an ownership over that, and that certainly makes our job easier as an oversight board. I don't know that we need to wish you luck in your next endeavor if there is another endeavor after this, but we certainly wish you success if there is. If there's not, and it is just rest and relaxation, that is very well deserved as well. I think that you can rest easy knowing that you have served the people of the state of Texas brilliantly. Thank you, Tony.
Okay, while I'm raving about staff, I have one more, but don't worry, nobody else is leaving. Before you today, you have a report on the outcome of the ASC compliance review. We received an excellent rating for both of our programs, and this was a collective effort by the board staff as well as our education division. And I'm very grateful for their hard work. It was a heavy lift. But I can't let today's report on this review go by without just saying a special thanks to Melissa Tran. Her leadership through this review was extraordinary. It made me just even more grateful than I ever have been for her. She thought ahead. She prepared in advance. She prepared her staff in advance. She communicated very effectively with the ASC staff. And in a few cases, she was more knowledgeable on the criteria than those who were reviewing our programs. And that provided us with an incredible advocate for the board that affected the end result of those reviews positively. So Melissa, I've always known she's an asset to this agency. She was an extreme asset to this review process, and I just want to thank her for her leadership and her efforts on that. So thank you, Melissa.
May I jump in before you move on from that as well? Sorry. I also kind of wanted to take this moment to remind us that, when I started on the board, we kind of shifted gears and we said our ultimate goal is not to get an excellent or A+ rating from the ASC. It's to serve the license holders of the state of Texas. That's our priority. And if it makes us go down in a grade with the ASC, so be it. But that wasn't where we were going to put our priorities. And the fact that we have been able to do both simultaneously, I think, speaks volumes to Director Tran's leadership. And so I just want to say thank you, because I thought that, in my final days here, there might be not great news from the ASC, and I was okay if that was going to happen. But to know that it hasn't happened, I think is definitely due to you and the rest of the staff. So thank you.
Absolutely. Okay, now on to the nitty-gritty. Before you today is a proposed budget for the fiscal year 2025. I just wanted to say a few things about this budget and the season of budgeting. I'm not going to talk numbers, don't worry. That is for Ms. Williams. But first, Mr. Bolton, thank you for bringing to our attention at the May meeting our failure, I'll say it, to follow our own budget policy. This policy directed staff to bring forward sustainable fee reductions upon a year-end fund balance that was exceeding 20% of our annual budget. So while it shouldn't be the case, this was a piece of the policy that was unfamiliar to us. We just had not spent time on it. And it was a change made to that change to the policy was made several years ago now. And I have spent some time and can't really figure out the practical why, as to why it was changed. But regardless, I'm grateful you brought it to our attention. So with that policy, I want to explain kind of what, if we implemented it the way that it currently reads, what would happen. We currently have a 3-month reserve requirement, right? So that's 3 months. And then with this policy, we would only be able to save 20% of our annual salary in addition. So that's about another 2 months. So we would essentially be able to have a 5-month financial runway for any variable or variation in revenue. We have high years and low years, and then we have the unforeseeable. And so when we looked at it that way, collectively, staff and then the budget committee, there seems to be consensus around the idea that a 5-month runway is not a conservative approach. And so what we did was we reviewed changes to that policy, and those are before you today, that would allow more like a year's runway, about a year's reserve, to just apply that more conservative approach. So the budget before you has that policy consideration in mind, and then that policy change is also before you today. There are additional amendments to the policy to account for the need to watch that fund balance and to make sure it does not grow exponentially within that tension, to have enough leeway to be flexible and have the funding we need for variations in the revenue, but to also to ensure that our budget or that our funding does not grow more than we need to fulfill the mission of the agency. So we are committed to living within that tension. So by making the adjustments to our policy, our year-end balance is less than we thought it would be. And what remains does not seem to allow, based on the data that you have in your materials, for a sustainable fee decrease. But we have provided you with options to spend down the remaining balance. And those decisions you can make as you wish and in the time frame you wish. It doesn't have to be made today. We can basically consider the budgeting season as long as you desire. So I wanted you to kind of have that frame of mind because it's August. We're seeking approval of a 2025 budget today, but that doesn't mean that it's written in stone, and those conversations can continue based on the will of this board. Moving on to our database. As you recall, we're in the process of a replacement of our back-end database. This is funded by TREC. And we continue to make progress really in all divisions across the agency. And the status of that progress really is different in every group or piece of the work. Some groups are in configuration, some are in validation, some are in automation. These are all technical words that I've come to kind of understand what it all means, but there's testing all along the way to ensure that the work being done is going to work for us. We are also working on data conversion, which I have come to understand is really the most complex piece of this project. We expect a completion in what I'm going to say spring of 2025. I am not declaring a date just yet. I'm a bit fearful to do so. I don't want to be wrong. But Tom Watson, our IT director, is here to answer any questions you have on that project. I am in front of my skis very quickly on this IT project, but I'm excited about this progress. People are working very hard on it. It is slower than I would like, but I think the end result of what we will see is high quality. You have executive summaries of all of our staff reports in your materials. They begin on page 32. You'll see that we're pretty steady and consistent all across the board, but staff are all here to answer any questions you have on those topics, and of course, I am happy to do the same. Anything?
Any questions for Ms. Buchholz?
Okay.
No.
Director Wheeler has the next report.
Director Wheeler. Good morning.
Good morning. Oops. Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. Jennifer Wheeler, Director of Education for the record. Some questions were raised at the last board meeting regarding exam pass rates and were later considered and addressed at the Education and Licensing Committee meeting. I'm here to provide you with an overview and hopefully provide you with some assurances. I'll start with a few high-level comments regarding the appraiser licensing exam process overall. The exam is reviewed and updated every 5 years using statistically validated methodologies for developing professional licensing exams. Most recently, this was done in 2020. The AQB, in conjunction with PSI, an educational measurement company, performs a large-scale job task analysis. You may have heard of PSI, as they are also a licensing administration exam vendor used by some other states. This job task analysis is typically done through a survey of appraisal subject matter experts across the country. They ask them to review a list of professional activities and tasks. They ask them how frequently they perform those tasks, how important those tasks are to the profession. They also ask respondents to review a list of knowledge areas and indicate how often they apply that knowledge area and how important that knowledge area is for their work. In 2021, they had a group of subject matter experts review the results of the 2020 survey and determine what changes may need to be made to the exam. Any questions that are added as a result of the job task analysis are entered initially only as pretest questions, which means that they are presented to the student, but the student is not required to answer correctly in order to pass the exam. Every appraiser licensing exam contains 15 pretest questions that they are not graded on. Once the pretest questions have been presented for a full year, the performance of those questions is reviewed and analyzed based on psychometric criteria. At that point, they are either introduced into the live exam bank, rewritten, and put back into the pretest bank, or discarded altogether if they aren't performing at the level that they need to be. All right, so that's kind of an analysis of the exam process. This is what occurs every 5 years. Another initiative, just as an FYI, and I know you are all kind of familiar with this already, but the AQB is currently undertaking a holistic review of the real property appraiser qualification criteria. Phase 1 is consideration of the college degree requirement. Phase 2 will explore the potential for allowing experience from related professions as a potential alternative to satisfy some amount of experience. But phase 3 is what's relevant to this conversation. It will study the structure and requirements of the national exams overall for each of the licensing credentials. The AQB plans to issue discussion drafts, host listening sessions, and reach out to stakeholders to gather diverse viewpoints. You will hear more about this as they progress, and I know we've discussed in previous meetings opportunities to provide direct feedback to the AQB. This is going to be that opportunity. So one of the questions or the concerns raised at the last board meeting was the accuracy of the exam results that we received from our contracted exam vendor. Ms. Robinson shared with the board a conversation she had with a regulator from another state who reported a significant error in the reporting during a recent period. There are two things that are important to note here. The state that experienced the reporting errors uses a different licensing exam vendor than we do. The second thing that is important to note is that we have a system in place to verify and validate exam results reports we receive from Pearson VUE, our licensing exam vendor, every month. The Education Division has a staff person responsible for verifying this data and confirming either accuracy or reporting contradictions and making necessary corrections. For example, if the reports indicate that 47 individuals passed the exam on the first attempt, she, the staff person, will pull the raw data that reflects each test taker's name who passed and ensure that there are in fact 47 names. If not, she will dig deeper into the data to determine where the error might lie. That said, this is not something that occurs regularly. Pearson VUE has a really great track record for reporting exam results, and it is very rare that we need to make a correction. So just as an FYI. The last topic that I want to address is the exam pass rates that Texas is experiencing. The AQB has indicated that the national first-time pass rates have been consistent for the last 5 years, and they hover somewhere around 50 or 60%, somewhere in that percentile range. This range is considered acceptable by both the AQB and the Educational Measurement Company. For the most part, the board first-time pass rates also hover within that 50 to 60% range. There are two exceptions that occurred in 2020 and 2023, where the first-time pass rates for the certified general appraiser license fell below 40%. Because of the smaller applicant pool for appraisers in general, it's not really realistic to determine any kind of root cause other than candidates may have just been better prepared in certain years than others. But if I may, I'd like to turn your attention to the topic of overall pass rates for Texas. In this fiscal year, to date, we have seen an overall pass rate of 70% for certified general appraisers, an overall pass rate of 87% for certified residential appraisers, and another 70% for licensed residential appraisers. These are really solid statistics and indicate a healthy licensing exam. The difference between the first-time pass rates and the overall pass rates tells me that the licensing exam is doing its job, which is to prevent someone who is not adequately prepared from entering the industry, and to establish a minimum standard to determine who the candidates are that are ready. I know it's a lot of information, but I also know that this is a really important discussion to this board and to the subcommittee. I want you to feel well-informed on this topic, and I hope that what I've presented you today offers you some comfort and assurance that we are in a pretty good place, I believe, as it relates to the exam pass rates. But I'm happy to answer any questions and take any other direction that this board or the subcommittee might have.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I had a few comments, if that's okay. First thing, thank you for the in-depth information and digging deeper into some of the concerns that we had, particularly related to the mistakes that have been made in some of the other states,
Right.
or one particular state that I was aware of. It is very refreshing to know that we do have that level of scrutiny when we are having our folks take that test, that we are actually looking at that monthly and comparing that data and digging deeper and identifying any issues. It's also really good to know that that doesn't happen very often for Texas. So thank you for that. That does help me sit and sleep a little better at night. But I really do appreciate the additional information and certainly how you've staffed that that area to where we can feel confident that Texas is doing it the right way. So thank you to you and your team.
Thank you very much.
When you talked about auditing the data, so your example was if they said 47 people passed and then you go through the raw data and find that 47 people had in fact passed. What if they said 46 passed and the raw data said 47, does that mean that one test taker was that we received the wrong results for them, or it's just their summary was wrong?
It more than likely means that we did not receive an exam result for one individual. And so we have to go back and go into, we have a reporting tool from Pearson View that we use, and we can go back in and look and see who was examined. And it's usually just a glitch, if it does happen, it's just this
So does the
exam
test-
result didn't pop over.
Right. So does the test taker know at the end of their test if they passed or not? It's been a
The
long
test
time.
taker knows.
Okay, so
Yes.
when they walk out.
Yes.
So then Pearson View gives that information to us on a rolling basis. So every day of the month or however often it happens, we're getting that information.
Every
Then at
day.
the end of the month, we get a summary of everybody who's passed.
That's correct.
So if that test taker knows that they passed and y'all likely and hopefully will have found out within a few days of that happening. So it wouldn't be like the test taker didn't know that they passed and we weren't told that they passed and they somehow just fell, right? That's not
That's
going to
correct.
happen. Okay.
That does not happen.
Wanted to make sure
No.
that was.
And we don't have to wait to the end of the month for reports because we do have a reporting tool we have access to. So if an applicant came to us and said, hey, I got a passing score, but my license hasn't been issued, we can check that data
Yeah.
within
Okay, perfect.
immediately.
Perfect. And just as a refresher for me reading these tables, when we talk about unique applicants, that means each individual. So that means however many people took the test.
Total
And then-
number of people,
okay,
yes.
So for example, in fiscal year to date, 87 unique applicants, that's 87 people. 77 passed it on their first time. First time test takers here. And that means the other 10 took it other minus 187, minus 136 times. Is that the way to read that data?
You know what? I don't have that.
I'm
in
sorry.
front
Yeah,
of
I
me.
won't.
No, that's okay.
It's page 44 of the material.
Okay.
Well, and it's fine. We can, you know, if we put this stuff out publicly, I just want to make sure if I'm having questions that other people who are reading this data have have the answers to.
Absolutely. Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's what that means.
I just pulled it up. Yes, thank you.
That seems a lot, right? 10 people taking the test that many times?
That's exactly what that means.
Okay.
I just like to have something
No, I
to
appreciate it.
put my eyes
Okay,
on.
very good. We certainly appreciate you digging into that. I think those are some questions, you've answered some questions that we haven't asked in the past. And I would assume that you know, there's a lot of professional exams out in the world, right? So there's got to be best practices, and hopefully we're just holding everyone accountable to making sure that that's happening. And perhaps the update in 2020 might be why we're seeing some better pass rates now. And your understanding is they do the survey for a year, and then for the next 4 years, they're constantly testing new questions, or that kind of happens for 1 or 2 years and then it falls off?
No, there's a constant influx of new questions added to the exam in the pretest.
Okay, very good.
Area.
All from
Not-
that 2020 survey they did, they spend the next 4 years testing new questions. Okay, very good.
It's interesting.
It is interesting.
And I think that the board, I mean, I just want to say I appreciate the inquiries, because I think as a whole, we've learned a lot and come a long way. So,
Yeah, and I think when we start asking questions, that makes other people kind of pay attention to things in a different way too, you know.
In the committee meeting, we talked about the opportunity to give feedback during this session. Can you talk to us a little bit about that and kind of where we are with that?
yeah, well, the AQB, I mean, obviously the AQB will always hear feedback, but what I think, you know, in a more formal manner, this whole three-phase approach at the real property criteria is going to drive that home. So I think, you know, it's a process. They're looking at phase one. I think everybody's aware that, you know, they're considering the college degree requirement first. But as a part of this process and as a part of, you know, specifically a part of phase three, they're going to look at the national exam content in a way that they don't traditionally do. So I think this is just going to be a bigger, heavy lift, and they will be seeking out specific input. So that's the opportunity that I think we were talking about in the committee meeting, and that's something that you'll not only hear from the AQB directly, but that we will report to you at the board level, at the Education and Licensing Committee level. As we hear things and those opportunities are opened up, then we will make you aware of them.
I appreciate that. And just for those that are not familiar with what the AQB is doing right now, is that three-phase. Can you kind of walk us through just high level, phase one, phase two, phase three, and then the opportunity for outsiders to how they are to contact them to give them feedback? Do you? I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have that overall?
Yeah.
Just for the board members that may not be aware of what's of the different phases
Of the
and
process.
the request for information that AQB is doing right now, and then also for those in the audience and our viewers.
Ms. Robinson, were you thinking that possibly the board would provide feedback to the, or provide comments?
Perhaps if we see an opportunity where we can give feedback that would help our state applicants and test takers, that may be an option. So I don't want to take that off the table for, you know, if we have an incredible board, as well as our all of our other stakeholders that have an opportunity to give feedback. I just want to make sure that the public is aware
I
that they can do that.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. So did you want me to kind of go over the phase
Yeah, just
one,
on a
phase
high
two,
level,
phase
just so
three?
everyone's on the same page, and then how the board can be involved if we choose. Also, how can our stakeholders, our consumers that's receiving appraisal services, as well as our appraisers, what does that process look like for them to give feedback to AQB?
Okay, so yeah, phase one is the consideration, we said this, of the college degree requirement. Phase two is the exploration of related professions and how it might open up opportunities for similar experience from similar professions to allow for some amount of the experience required for an appraisal certification. Phase 3 is the one that addresses the national exam. And in all of these initiatives, the AQB is hosting discussion forums, webinars. You can attend live. They're open to the public. Our stakeholders can get involved. Our board members can be involved, be online. They solicit feedback live, throughout the webinar. We've attended several of them, and, it's very, it's not formal, it's not completely informal, but there's a definite exchange of information and ideas that is welcome at these meetings. So that's encouraging, I think. Of course, you can also email them. Email is always a great way, and it's documented. You can look back to it, exactly what you've said and what you've asked, and so if you're getting your questions answered or what the response is. Of course, the email address is on their website. I don't have it off the top of my head.
Perhaps we can make that part of our newsletter, which I think we have in the past, but to make all the stakeholders aware of the different phases, when it's open for public comment, how to make public comment. Again, just to make everyone aware that those are,
And that's a great idea, and we have that planned for the next newsletter.
Perfect.
As part of a communication.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure everyone knew that they had an opportunity to speak up and give feedback, and they're accepting feedback, and
Yes.
and that's a great thing. So
I think this will be a great opportunity.
yeah, thank you for that.
Very good.
All right.
Anything else for Director Wheeler?
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Thank you for the in-depth report.
If I may, I will call up our Pearson View rep. Is it?
Oh,
the
perfect,
appropriate
yes.
time?
Yes, absolutely, let's do that. We will hear agenda item number 28, and I also, after she's done, Mr. DiBiasio, I will make time for you as well. I apologize for overlooking that earlier, agenda item number 22. So we will bring Mr. DiBiasio up after Pearson View.
All right. So I'd like to welcome our Business Development Manager, Carrie Dahl from Pearson View. She has a brief presentation for you all. And please, welcome.
Good morning, Ms. Dahl.
Hello, thank you for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. This is my second year, so I'm excited. Do you have the presentation? Perfect, okay. I'll just watch from my screen and make sure that we kind of go at the same pace. Wonderful. That's it. Okay, so thank you for having me. It's good to be back for a second year, and I appreciate the time. I'd like to run through a few slides that we've put together for you. So we can move to the second slide. You just heard a little bit about the AQB. And so how the AQB works, we get the exams from them. They work with a different exam provider, PSI, to create the content. And then we, as the exam provider for the state of Texas, we get the content outlines and the content of the exam from AQB directly. Move myself down here. This year we have something new. We have 18 new sample questions to give to applicants, which brings us to a total of 24. So those 18 new questions were, I believe, existing questions that have been brought out of the exam by AQB and given to us to publish. That's in the handbook, and I'll show you a copy of the handbook very shortly. So we are now up to 24 prep questions for individuals that are sitting for that exam. So that is a new change this year. And we do really encourage, in order to have individuals ready to feel ready, to be ready to sit for that exam, we encourage them to really take a good look at the candidate handbook, to read through that and ask any questions that they feel they don't have answered yet. So if we can move to the next slide yet. This is the candidate handbook. And this is available at any time to anybody. If you go to pearsonview.com/Texas/appraisers, or TX/appraisers, this is downloadable as a PDF. You can view it either online or downloaded, and it's always kept up to date on our website. Within this, it has been referred to as kind of the Bible as far as how to take this exam. It goes through the process, right? It tells the individual how to get ready for the exam, what the test center experience will be like, what is allowed. It goes into accommodations. It goes into the scheduling, cancellation, rescheduling policies. Everything is written out in this handbook. And if you haven't had a chance yet to visit the website and read through the handbook, I would recommend that. There's a lot of information in there. And this is really what every individual sitting for that exam should be taking a look at. Content outlines, it's all there. And switch. This is our test center location map. This is one of my favorite maps in the country because it is robust. You have quite a few test centers within the state. And Pearson VUE test centers are broken up into 3 different styles. We have our PPC, or our Pearson Professional Centers, which are owned and operated specifically by Pearson VUE. We have, I believe, 29 within the state of Texas spread out, and those are marked with the little P's. So you can see that we have some pretty solid coverage as far as our PPCs, but the other 171 are partner sites, and those partner sites are offered at colleges and universities, tech centers, training facilities, learning centers, etc. And we make sure that those test centers hit our security requirements, space requirements, and they are also shown as available for all of the times that they can offer those exams to the public for registration. Our third option is the government sites. Those are usually U.S. military bases, and Texas does have 4. We have 2 in the, let's see, Goodfellow Air Force Base, 1 nearby in Fort Cavazos, and then 1 over in Fort Bliss. Any questions on this map? Because there's a lot of information.
I'm sorry, just in case I missed it. You said, have we increased the testing sites? Or
They've
is
been
it?
consistent since about last year. So there was a
last year, okay.
huge build out during COVID.
Okay, okay.
That's where, right after COVID hit, everything kind of went on hold, right? The in-person testing, just
Okay.
like everything else, took a hit. So in order to get that back up and running and make sure that people had the ability to test and get in there and be in a physical test center, we did a massive expansion of third-party test centers, which leads us to our 200, I believe at this point, plus the 4 government sites just within the state of Texas. And that is absolutely not inclusive of all of the other states where these exams can be delivered.
And are you seeing a significant wait for the test takers to be able to get in and that sort of thing? Or do you feel like this number of testing sites is adequate for the applicants that are trying to test?
Yeah, great question. We have an entire team that works on capacity, and they monitor capacity in all of our test centers. And that's done for all the exams that we offer, not just the appraiser exams. So when, for instance, the nursing exams, they will have a hard push often after nursing classes are done and they're getting ready to sit for that certification. Those may go up. Our capacity managers will always be watching. It's the technology exams, anything that has a specific window. So we're able to, especially with this many test centers throughout the country, we're able to flux that. And I think our statistic, and I will look this up, I believe it's 95% are able to schedule within 1 week. Yep, within 1 week. I'm going to jump to the next slide.
Thank you.
And this is showing your top 10. So out of all those 200, here are the top 10 sites, and we're going by 2024. So these are the top 10 sites in Texas for appraiser exams. I would like to point out that these are majority third-party test sites. There's 1 Pearson VUE test site, and that one is in Amarillo. But all of the others are the third-party sites. So our build-out of those sites and our partner sites is very beneficial.
For those of us who are not able to see, that's okay. Do we have a copy of this in our material? Or can we get access maybe as a follow-up?
Sure. Yeah,
Is that okay? Thank you so much.
we can absolutely share this with you. Just to give you a high, since the letter is so small, the largest test numbers are in Richardson. And then we have Houston, Fort Worth, Frisco, Plano, Austin, Louisville, Amarillo is our Pearson Professional Center, and then we have Dallas and another one in Austin. So those are the top 10. And we'll jump to the next. And I wanted to talk a little bit about exam scheduling and delivery. We follow the rules that are established by the agency, and we do this with all of our tests for all of our different partners. The rules that are established by the agency are the business rules that we follow. So in order for someone to register or sign up for an exam, there's two different options. The most popular is the web-based option. It's available to them at any time. It's relatively easy if you do want to visit your website, and that's where you'd also find the handbook. You can go through that process and you can see where all of the test centers are located. It has a test center search, but the web is the most convenient way and most accurate way to do that. The other option is to have a call-in. You can call our test center or you can call our customer service. They have more limited hours, but they see the exact same registration system as the individual will see on the internet. So you're not, nothing is being held back. There's no special exam windows that are available by calling. It is the exact same for an individual, however they choose to register for that exam. Any confirmation, cancellation, rescheduling, anything of that nature is sent to the email on file, and those records are kept. When you check into the test center, and this is covered in the handbook, you have two forms of ID. You have first is your photo ID with a signature, and then the secondary form could be a credit card or something else, but it does have to have a signature on that second form of ID. Candidates will leave the test center, and you touched on this earlier, with score report in hand. So they know as they go up to the desk, they'll know if they passed or failed. And they'll have that in hand. It's a printout. And I have photos of those, or images of those on the next page that you can see. So you'll be able to see a pass and a fail. All exams are $55. And the one bullet point I think I didn't read was, they're also available to the individual at any time on their web account. So if, for instance, they've misplaced the one that has been handed to them at the test center, they can go in at any time to their own account and pull down a new pass or fail. And this is what they look like. So on the left, you have a score report of a pass. Very short, very simple. You passed this, moving on, you're excited. The second is a fail. And it gives you a little bit more detail. It sort of breaks down where your scores aren't as high, where you might be able to focus more on your study. It really helps to prepare them to pass when they're ready to sit for that exam again. Any questions? Okay. And that brings me to my questions tab. So I am open for any questions that you have.
How many questions is the exam?
Well, that's a good one. Off the top of my head, I am not positive. I can get back to you with that later today.
Oh, it's fine.
Jen knows.
115.
115.
It's only 115 questions, and 24 of those are plus 24.
15 are tests.
Oh, 15 are
So the
24, right, Carrie?
Yeah, so the 24 are practice before they even go in. So the practice test
what that
questions,
was.
yeah, those are in the handbook. So those are
Sorry.
available to all of you at any time to review. That's to get an individual prepared for the exam. So the pre-test questions that are built into the exam, those are 15.
I'm just curious from the industry perspective, with me having my community hat on, my public hat on. Once they get that letter of, that they didn't pass and where they can improve,
Yep.
what happens next? Do they go back to an education provider to get more
I think
help?
they can just schedule again. I mean, they don't have to do anything. Am I correct? Right.
That's correct. And every agency has different rules as far as if you are required to go back and take exams, if you are required to do more training, how many times you can test before training, et cetera. But yeah, you can go ahead and schedule your exam the next day if you'd like. But what it does is gives you that tool to see where you can focus more study time, or where you fell a little bit short, or where you did great. And this was an area that you've got down. You just need to focus on other
So it's
spots.
up to the test taker to say, hey, I may need to go get more training in this particular area before I retest, or,
Exactly.
okay, now I know, let me go back in. So it'd be up to the, okay.
Don't we have a policy that says after 3 fails, you have to
Yeah,
go
I
back and do 30 hours of training? Yeah.
And that's very common. And that's why when I say every agency does it a little bit differently, we follow those rules set by the agency that we're working with. So if it's after 3, then you might.
So how does the test taker prove to you that they have done the required training, additional training?
So actually, I'm going to work with Jill
Yeah,
on that
I
one,
was just thinking
because
that. So we
take-
make the policy, and then they have to figure out how to put that into their software system that denies the fourth
Yep,
test.
absolutely. And our system does do that. So we built it so that it follows your rules. So if for instance, their name has X number of attempts next to that. And once those attempts are used up, we know to not allow them to take that exam again going further without speaking with you guys first.
So they send us the education, the additional education that's necessary, and then we go into the system and say, okay, you have 3 more attempts, which communicates to Pearson VUE.
Yep.
That they're eligible to register again.
How long do they have to take these questions, this test?
What's the time?
Past the authorization, once you're authorized, how long do you have to?
The actual exam time.
Oh, the actual exam time, is it?
4 hours for the licensed residential and the certified residential, and 6 hours for certified general.
I remember that.
Answer 100 questions.
And actually, I was corrected. It's 125 questions on the exam.
Right.
If it takes 6 hours, those are some
That
tough
kind of puts the
questions, yeah.
pass rate in a little bit different of a perspective when you consider that each question is, okay, wow. Again, something we've never considered. At the end of the test, do you survey your test takers about all the facilities, the availability, all of that sort of thing?
Absolutely. So every test individual, before they leave their testing spot, before they're given their pass or fail, so it is not affected by that at all, they're given a list of survey questions. And those survey questions touch on things: how easy was it to register? Were you able to find the test center well? What is your I think there's about 10 questions.
Okay.
What is your overall? Would you recommend this, et cetera? So those are given at we have a standard set of 10 that are given at every exam. Not even appraiser exams alone, but there are standard 10 questions, and we do track all of those answers.
And just, it doesn't have to be a comprehensive list, but can you just give us some examples of other professions that y'all test for?
Oh my gosh.
You said nurses.
Absolutely. We work with, so I specifically work in the regulatory arena, where we work with real estate, appraisers, insurance, cosmetology, some agriculture, anything that's licensed by the state.
Okay.
We can work with that. Outside of that, we have professional organizations such as Payroll, or American Payroll Association, which is now referred to as PAO. We have Microsoft. We have, oh my gosh, there's so many different umbrellas of styles of business.
So we
that work with.
we have over the years heard at times that people had trouble getting in to take exams. So you're saying that there are some nurses, you said, that maybe they're ending their courses and they have a certain amount of time, so they all dump into the exam arena at the same time. Is that pretty common amongst other test takers? I'm just trying to think of, when we talk about if there's limited availability, that we kind of understand what could be causing that at certain times of the year.
Yes. So yes and no, right? So some of the organizations that we work with have even testing windows where your testing window will be open for 2 months of the year, or 2 months at the beginning of the year, 2 months in the fall. Those are considered testing windows. You guys run on a rolling, so you don't have any specific dates you have to hit that by. Some have, for instance, some of our police exams or our law enforcement exams, they'll have a big rush at the end of a class or a graduating class. But that's where our capacity management team really comes into play, because they watch this. They know when those test windows are. They know when the flows are higher and lower. Back to school time changes things. Summer changes things. The holidays might be a little lower. It really depends. But we work really closely with our capacity management team to make sure that things are available. One thing that really does help that is the number of exam locations that you have in Texas. It is robust. You're one of the largest states for exam location testing facilities that I've seen.
Okay. And y'all are across the country?
We're global, actually.
Global.
So the majority of the regulatory exams are taken within the continental, or within the, not continental, but within the United States. They can be offered at the military bases off the United States proper. We do some of those overseas for military and their families, anyone that has access to a base. Every once in a great while, we'll get a request from someone in another country. They're staying for a period of time, but would like to take one of our exams, the regulatory exams. We just figure out how to make that happen.
Oh, wow.
So we are a global, I think it's 171 countries that we tested.
I wanted to just mention one thing, kind of a benefit of COVID, is that we significantly opened up these testing center options. I think before COVID, we were primarily just on the Pearson VUE sites. And so then during COVID, just to get people through, because of the, social distancing and all of that, we opened it up to the sites not owned by Pearson. Remind me what you call them. You've said it.
Our terminology is called PVTC, or partner sites. Pearson VUE testing centers.
And so we kept that open, since COVID, and that significantly expanded options for where people take tests, number one, and then how long it takes to get scheduled. So that's been a huge win for us across the board.
I definitely remember having a difficult time when I took the exam to get a site. Just because it was before that time.
Yeah.
And now talking to colleagues that are taking the test and stuff, like they pull it up and there's so many sites in, the Houston area, so there's a lot of sites there, that it's much easier within, like you said, within a week they can take the test. So it's a pretty good, it's been a good, at least in that regard, it's a pretty good system. But.
And it does show that too. Within your top 10, only one of those top 10 is a Pearson Professional Center, owned and operated by Pearson, that would have been available prior to COVID. So the build out of that much larger, I think it's 171 additional sites that you have throughout the state of Texas, that is one of our most, if not most, robust state maps that we have. It's a beautiful map. I love it. I think it's great. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Any other questions?
Any other questions? No. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
I imagine when we see you all again, we will have a million more questions, because I feel like this is just a topic that we have always dug into. Yeah, for certain.
Important topic.
For certain.
And through Jennifer, I'm always available. So if you have questions, please send them over. We will do everything that we can to get those answered for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for coordinating that. Very good. Okay, again, before executive session, we will hear from Mr. DC himself, Mr. DiBiasio, who was yesterday in pleasant weather and had to come to humid Texas today.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the board. For the record, Scott DiBiasio with the Appraisal Institute, and yes, I was in Minneapolis yesterday. However, I am leaving here tomorrow to go to Las Vegas, so I'm going from the from the fire into the frying pan. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you all this morning. Director Tran had reached out to me and asked if I was interested in coming down and providing to the board an update on the practical applications of real estate appraisal and how the implementation and the operation of that program is going. Of course, we are now about 1 year into the operation of PAREA, and I am happy to say that for all intents and purposes, it is functioning exactly as we had anticipated. We currently have 144 people enrolled in the program from around the country, and I am very excited to say that 25% of those, 36 people, are from here in the state of Texas. That's pretty remarkable. And as the chair and board member Castro indicated at the beginning of the meeting, there are 2 people from Texas that have already completed the program, one of whom I believe is already licensed. The other, I believe, maybe continuing into the CR module, and probably maybe taking a little bit of a break between completion of LR and CR. That is the only reason why that person perhaps has not yet become licensed, is that they're just going to go directly to certified. I am also happy to say that we have 2 other people from Texas that are completing their final 3 assignments and should be graduating from the program here within the next couple of weeks. I'm also happy to say that one of the individuals from here in Texas who is finishing their final 3 assignments is the first person to have completed the first 2 final assignments on the first submission, if you follow me on that. With the final assignments, I think there's one opportunity for the graders to provide you with feedback and for you to correct whatever deficiencies it is there are in your final assignments, and for you to resubmit those. These 2 people submitted perfect reports on the first go-around, so that's very, very impressive. As with any new program, especially one that is based on technology, we are experiencing some developmental challenges, and one of the challenges that we're having is that folks are coming to us not having completed quality qualifying education. They are coming to us woefully unprepared to begin their experience training program. And our mentors are having to spend an inordinate amount of time with them, re-educating them on what they should have learned in their qualifying education. And what's happening is it is taking those folks significantly longer than we ever anticipated to be able to go through the program. We have folks that are in the program now that are still on the first couple of practice assignments, having been in the program now, in some cases, for almost a year. So that is hindering our ability. We have 5 mentors on staff, each of which has roughly 30 PAREA participants assigned to them. But because people are not rolling out of the program in a timely manner, that's inhibiting our ability to bring new people into the program. So we have another 150 who are ready, willing, and able to enter into PAREA, who are just waiting for spots to open up. And as they open up, we are enrolling those people in the program. That's a real significant challenge for us, because our financial modeling was based on having more people moving through the program in a more timely manner, and that's just not the case. We were anticipating roughly 6 months for the LR module and roughly 12 months to go all the way through to CR, and unfortunately for most people in the program that is not the case. Part of that is due to the education deficiencies that I talked about. Another part of it is due to some people, unfortunately, just not taking the program very seriously. We need people to treat this program as a full-time or at least a part-time job, much like they would their training experience working with a supervisor. And unfortunately, for many people in the program, that hasn't been the case. They're spending an hour here, an hour there, and it just does not contribute to them being able to get through those assignments in a timely manner.
Hey, Scott, is this entirely self-paced?
It is entirely self-paced. Obviously, our mentors are trying to get people through in as timely manner as possible so that we can bring new people in. But like I said, we anticipated 6 months for LR and 12 months for CR. That's about 2 weeks for each of the 10 practice assignments and 2 weeks for the final 3 assignments. And folks are taking significantly longer than that, mostly because they're not dedicating the time that's necessary to successfully go through the program. Ms. Reed-Lynch.
Is there a entrance exam or something to say you're ready to tackle this?
There will be next week.
I think that's, yeah.
Absolutely, Ms. Reed-Lynch. We actually are now, and soon will be putting in place, the board just decided yesterday, to put in place an entrance exam to make sure that folks are prepared and have, learned what they needed to have learned in the qualifying education to be able to enter into the program. And we're anticipating that that's probably going to cut out about half and send half of those people back to the drawing board to be able to re-educate themselves, not necessarily to retake the classes, but to go back and revisit what they should have learned in the classroom. So that's one of the things that we are putting in place as a vetting process to make sure that once somebody comes into the program, they're able to go through in a timely manner.
Well, I wonder if it's a failure on our education system as well as, possibly the real estate classes, but we're seeing that across the board with the graduates of high school, and that they graduate them and they're graduating them and they're not prepared.
I will tell you that everyone that is in the program is being challenged, and everyone to one degree or another is struggling. From a regulatory perspective, I think that that's actually a good thing, because it shows that people are really being challenged to learn the methods and techniques to be successful real estate appraiser. However, there's a limitation to that. We've actually had several people tell us, independent, not participants in the program, that have reviewed it, that it is too hard. And that's something that we are also taking another look at to make sure that there's that balance there between difficulty and being too difficult that people just can't get through it. I will tell you anecdotally that, like I said, everybody is struggling to get through the program. Those that have taken AI, Appraisal Institute qualifying education, are struggling a little bit less. And those that have taken online education from a for-profit education provider are the ones that are struggling the most. Read into that what you want. Yeah, it's a real challenge that the folks are coming to us just not having, in some cases, just very basic math and reading and writing skills, and not even the appraisal concepts and methodologies, but just very simple things like math and writing.
Scott,
I'm not surprised.
do you have, for lack of a better term, the demographics on these people that take additional time? Are they holding down a full-time job? Is that maybe the part of the reason that it's taking them longer, because they trying to move to a different profession, but they have to still make a living?
I believe that to be the case. I don't know that for sure, and I don't know if we have the statistics on that, but I'm guessing that that's the case. But we do need them to dedicate a certain amount of time per week, per month, whatever, on the program. And one of the things that we are, in addition to the entrance exam, that we are going to be putting in place is some time limitations on how long you have to get through the program. I believe it's going to be 6 months to get through LR, 12 months to get through CR, which equates to 2 weeks per assignment within the program. Obviously, there will be extenuating circumstances that we will have to address, and we will absolutely be fair. But we're actually going to require people to sign a contract that says that they will spend the time that is necessary to be able to get through this program in a timely manner, or we'll work with them to transition them out of the program.
When is
Have
that
you thought
going to
of-
take? I'm sorry. Go, Chance.
Have you thought of imposing deadlines for each assignment?
Yeah, absolutely. They're going to have 2 weeks per assignment, again, with extenuating circumstances. But generally, we're looking for the average to be about 2 weeks per practice assignment and 2 weeks per final assignment as well.
So you all have already approved the entrance exam being implemented. When are you planning to approve the time limit to be
That
implemented?
should be within the next month or so as well.
Okay, so that's already in the works. Okay. And then entrance exam, is there a fee for that?
No.
No fee for that, okay. Now, and the other thing I had, you talked about some of the drawbacks being educational deficiencies, taking more, not taking the program more seriously, some just not prepared for the program when they get in, those types of things. Can you share with us what are some of well, first of all, let me back up. I want to congratulate you guys, because this type of technology implementation nationwide is huge, and you guys really jumped out there and bit the bullet on this, and that is a huge undertaking. And you got to know, when you want to take something on like this huge, you're going to get a lot of people, talking down about it, being positive about it. You're going to hear all of it because you're the first guys out there, right? So thank you for doing it, because I think it's huge for the industry. And I think I spoke about this at a last board meeting. Any type of major technology implementation like this that changes the industry, shifts the industry, it's going to be some issues here and there that needs to be addressed. So thank y'all for doing it. We appreciate that very much for our industry. But back to so thank you. I wanted to say that. Back to my question on some of the things you mentioned as some of the issues that you're seeing. Can you share with us some of the issues on your side of things as a company offering this new technology product? Because we heard about how the test takers can improve the workflow and get through the process easier and faster, so you guys can turn them faster. But what are some of the things that internally you all have discovered that you need to do better?
Right.
And not to down talk it, it's just we put it out there so we can find solutions to improve, right? So.
Yep. Obviously, there are always technological glitches that we have to work through, literally on a daily basis. We're also being challenged in making sure that the information that is in the program is fresh and is applicable to today's appraisal world, meaning the GSCs are in the process of adopting new forms. Obviously, we're going to have to incorporate those forms into the program. The uniform appraisal data set is changing. We're going to have to incorporate that. So the program is constantly evolving. It's not static in any way. We're having some challenges with our mentors, just the amount of time that they are spending with each of the participants. These folks, who are all Appraisal Institute designated certified appraisers, they're working 70, 80 hours a week at all hours of the day with these mentees, trying to move them along through the program. And unfortunately, right now, because we're not able to move people through the program quick enough, we don't have the financial capacity to be able to hire additional mentors. And we are actively seeking outside sponsorship and participation to help us fund additional mentors to bring into the program. But until we can bring more people in, we're a little bit financially constrained on what we can do at this point. And it's only related to the mentors. Keeping the program up to date, making sure that the participants are properly supervised, properly, working through the program. That's not an issue at all. It's just a capacity issue right now because of the time constraints that the participants themselves are putting on us.
Oh, that brings up a good point. I appreciate you sharing that perspective for what you guys are facing, because that's very important for as an industry, for us to support you guys and try to help as much as we can. Because I know we had talked about maybe in the last arrow that you guys were looking. I think we mentioned you guys were looking to add on new mentors, but that's interesting to see because financially, it's numbers are numbers, right? So I get that. So talking about the financial piece of things, how are you doing? I mean, when you have this type of lag, so I know this was a huge financial investment up front, right? How are you doing?
I can tell you that we are subsidizing each of the participants to a very significant degree.
Okay.
The $4,400 that they pay is not nearly enough to be able to offset our operating costs. So we are on a monthly basis losing significant amount of money. However, our board yesterday doubled down and said that they are fully committed to moving forward with the program with some restructuring. So there is, right now, there's no potential for us to discontinue the program or pull out. Our board is fully committed to it with the changes that I talked about.
That's excellent, and I urge you guys to keep pushing because this is really a good thing. It's just a growing pains, and I know finances can shut a lot of things down, so my hope is that you all receive external funding to continue this program because I really think it is a good program for the industry.
And I can also tell you that all of the reviews that we have had from the participants have been overwhelmingly positive. The only one downside that they are expressing is not being able to interact with their mentors enough. Just because
and I've heard that from some Texans that I've just come across. That was some of the feedback that that I received, is that they were having a hard time getting through to the mentors. And so but as I said, it's growing pains and it's okay. Just stick with it, push through it, get the funding you need, tweak the internal stuff, which you guys are already doing, which I think is great. How are you guys working with the feds at all in terms of funding opportunities or things like that? Because this is actually, obviously a national issue. So are there any opportunities to get funding that way to keep the program going?
Yes. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to be able to access any of the money that the appraisal subcommittee has at their disposal to be able to provide grants to state appraiser regulatory agencies. I would love to be able to tap into that $30 million that they have sitting there.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, the law does not allow for it. But there are other federal apprenticeship-like programs that we are taking a look at. We're also looking at other industry participation, perhaps from users of appraisal services that would want to hire graduates that come out of the PREA program, and having them fund some of the mentors. We have no problem with funding for the participants themselves.
Right.
There's plenty of scholarship money out there. And I, from what I understand, you all are applying or have applied for some scholarship money to allow people to go through PREA, and other states are doing the same. There's plenty of scholarship money out there for the participants. Nobody's paying for our mentors.
Yeah,
that's a significant amount of our operating costs is the mentors, and we'd love to be able to bring on more mentors if we could. But we're looking at 5 right now at about probably a $1.2 million
numbers, I get it.
in terms of what it costs us every year to have those 5 mentors, and unfortunately we just don't have the financial capability to bring on additional mentors right now.
And last question, because I don't want to dominate this, but I'm so intrigued by the program. Last question for me. Is there an external process outside of your institution that's monitoring the success of this, since it is such a major initiative? Who's monitoring, and I brought this up at a previous board member, who's monitoring that total cycle from a third-party perspective to give you guys some insight?
Keep in mind, we've only had 7 people graduate from the program already. One of the one or two of those is moving on to LR. One is taking a break before they move into CR. And one is continuing to work with somebody that he had worked with previously to continue to hone his appraisal skills. So we don't have a significant cohort yet to find out what they're doing after they graduate from Perea, but we do keep in regular contact with them after they complete the program. And we also tie them in to our chapter network around the country. While we can't require it, we strongly encourage them to participate in chapter events, additional education opportunities, social events, so on and so forth, so that they can start to grow their peer network that would lead to other opportunities. I can tell you that it is highly unlikely, if not impossible, that somebody that comes out of Perea will be able to open their own appraisal company on the first day. It just doesn't happen like that. They are almost certainly going to have to go to work for a firm, for an appraisal management company if they can find one that will take them on, for a government agency, for a bank, so on and so forth, for a period of time before they can go out, if they desire, on their own and be an independent fee appraiser. They're just not going to be able to, no one would hire them one day after they're issued their credential.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
what you guys
Appreciate
do.
it. Sure. Very good question. We have a, I don't know a lot about it, but it is completely an online type of an arrangement. If the student is having a particular difficulty or wants to schedule a time to talk with their mentor, there's a system by which they can go in and put that request in or ask the question that they have, and their mentor then gets back to them through that same portal. But there's a variety of different email communication, telephone communication, but it's all facilitated through that management portal.
Is the Institute still the only Perea provider?
As of right now, yes. There were a couple of other providers that had started the development of Perea programs. They since have withdrawn from doing so. So as of right now, we are the only Perea provider. I can tell you that there are several practicum programs that are actively under development right now. And from what I understand, there are two young techie guys that are actively developing a Perea program literally in their parents' basement. And they have approached the AQB several times with prototypes, and each time they have been sent back to the drawing board. But in having talked with someone just recently, after the last time that they came to the AQB with their prototype, the point that was made to me was they're getting pretty close to having something that we can approve.
I was going to say, don't underestimate those tech guys.
Yeah, yep. So I think it's highly likely that there will be at least one other provider. They don't even have a company name. It's like Tony and Joe. You know, it's and they're not appraisers from what I understand. They are simply technology professionals and are taking whatever content I guess they can find and applying their technology skills and are getting close to having a program that's ready for prime time.
Thank you.
I think we sort of find ourselves in unexpected territory to some degree. You know, I think that we all thought that the Perea participants would be super gung-ho to get through the process because it was an alternative to a lengthy process. And so I think that's sort of what we all expected and didn't expect for people to just kind of say, I'm going to do it, you know, on the weekends or...
Hobby.
It's also different than what we thought. I think we thought there was going to be a lot of providers in this space, and you know, the Institute's been the only one for at least a year, and we don't know how many others are coming up behind you all. But the health of the appraisal population in the state of Texas is obviously in our purview, right? And you know, we have supported Perea since the very beginning as a way to add appraisers to our state population and to serve underserved areas of the state of Texas. So I think it's, what I'm hearing from you are the challenges. We would like to be part of the solution. Obviously, the Institute is a private enterprise, and we never, we can't show favoritism in any kind of way. But if there's anything that, as a board, that we can do, that would not only benefit the Institute, but the providers that are coming up behind you all, because I think that AQB spent 10 years developing this program, and you all have spent several years again on top of it. And I think that we shouldn't let the opportunity pass to try and make it a more robust program, not just for the Institute, but for all the other providers. And I think if there's anything that we can do as a board, advocate with the AQB if things need to be, changed at that level, that I think we would certainly be open to providing our voice behind any kind of change to make it easier.
Madam Chair, I appreciate that, and I will continue to, provide you all with periodic updates on where things stand, maybe every 6 months or so. And I did want to say thank you to your licensing staff, because the first person, I believe it was a young lady, that applied for licensing, having gone through the PREA program. From what I understand, it was a completely seamless operation, and she had her license after, obviously, she passed the exam. But the process was completely streamlined. There was no difference between how that person was treated compared to somebody that went through the supervisor trainee model and had an experience log and work product that they could show and such. Unfortunately, we're not experiencing that in other states. There are some states where people are coming to them having completed PREA, and they're having difficulty putting that square peg in a round hole, and having to come up with new processes. We had a situation just a couple of days ago in Missouri where they were completely the administrative staff, not necessarily leadership and not necessarily their commission, but the administrative staff was really just at a loss as to how to handle just having a certificate of completion from somebody that went through PREA. So we're having to work through some challenges with some of the state agencies as well. But for the most part, 4 out of the 7 I believe are already licensed. And interestingly enough, one of those folks got licensed in South Carolina and was able to get a reciprocal license right away in Georgia. So that was a significant development, a significant accomplishment, I think, as well. So things are moving along, and certainly as we see challenges that may help access to the program here in Texas and help people in Texas to be able to get through in a more timely manner, we'll certainly bring those to your attention. But from a regulatory perspective and from an operational perspective, I think everything is flawless at this point. And we're looking forward to having all of those 36 people that are in the program now coming to you all here shortly, as quickly as we can get them through the program to apply for, first to take the exam and then for licensing.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. And thank you to staff for making that happen. We did talk for a long time about these people are going to be showing up at our doorstep at some point, and it's such a different process than when they've already been part of our community and we know that they're coming. And then these PREAs just show up unannounced, and the fact that we were able to get them processed, I appreciate the work that we did ahead of time on that. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, board members.
Thank you. Okay, now is for agenda item number 13, which is our executive session. Executive session to discuss pending litigation or receive advice of legal counsel pursuant to Texas Government Code 551071 and a security audit pursuant to Texas Government Code 551076 and 551089. The time now is 10:34. The board will now go into executive session to obtain the advice of legal counsel or discuss pending or contemplated litigation, including settlement offers and enforcement actions pursuant to Texas Government Code 551071 and a security audit pursuant to Texas Government Code 551076 and 551089. We anticipate returning to open session, and approximately, let's say, 40 minutes will give us time to discuss and take a short break. 40 minutes, everyone? Okay. Very good. Thank you. Now is 11:28 a.m. and the board is back from executive session and reconvening in open session. This takes us to agenda item number 14. Ms. Santos.
Madam Chair, board members, Kathleen Santos, your General Counsel. Agenda item number 14, discussion and possible action to adopt amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code, Section 153.241, Sanctions Guidelines. Here, the amendments before you add additional factors that may be considered in determining the disposition of a formal complaint, specifically whether an appraisal or the conduct at issue was investigated by another governmental agency and the likelihood of the same or similar conduct occurring again. Additionally, the amendments allow for greater flexibility in sanctions for first-time discipline level 2 violations of the act or statute. We received no comments. Staff's recommendations are to authorize staff on behalf of this board to submit for adoption amendments to 22 TAC Section 153.241 as published, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for adoption. And I'm available for any questions.
Just wanted to make sure, is your microphone on? Yeah. It was
you
kind
not-
of hard to hear you.
Okay, I got it. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I
Thank
guess
you. Sorry
I'll
about
just be leaning in.
Yeah, Lena.
Did y'all get all that, or do I need to?
We did.
Sure.
Yeah, of course. Any questions for Ms. Santos? No?
Madam Chair? Oh, okay. I move that the board approve the staff's recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Castro and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. The next one is on page 71 in our materials.
Right, section number, agenda item 15, discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 TAC 153.24 complaint processing. Here before you, the proposed amendments do two things. One, they clarify preliminary investigative review process of when a respondent would be notified if needed, and then it corrects a reference within the rule. Staff's recommendations here is to authorize staff on behalf of the board to submit amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code, Section 153.24, as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for proposal. And I'm available for any questions if you have any.
Questions?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve staff's recommendations.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Robinson and a second by Mr. McAnally. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 16 is on page 75 in our materials.
Okay, agenda item number 16, discussion and possible action to propose amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 157, Subchapter B, contested case hearings, and those sections are listed specifically in your materials 157.9, 157.10, and 157.11. This brings us to the first of our quadrennial rule review rules. If you recall at the last meeting, we opened up this chapter for review, and then these are the recommended amendments to the specific specific sections in the chapter before you. And so there'll be, you know, if the board chooses to propose these, there'll be an opportunity for folks to notice and comment as they normally do with all our rules, and then at the next meeting, we could adopt and then potentially close this chapter for quadrennial rule review. And I'll give you this heavy load of the explanation, so I carry that over to all the other agenda items following this. So before you, in these three sections before you, you know, most of these changes are just truly for clarity, consistency, and readability. You know, so staff's recommendations for this is to authorize staff on behalf of the board to submit amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code, Sections 157.9, 157.10, and 157.11 as presented for publication and public comment to the Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton?
I move that the board approve staff's recommendation.
I'll second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Robinson. Any further discussion, questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 17 is on page 78 in our materials.
Agenda item number 17, discussion and possible action to propose amendments to Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 157, Sections 157.17, final decisions and orders, and 157.18, motions for a hearing. Again, these are being made as a result of quadrennial rule reviewed, and here we're simplifying the language and adding a reference to our own code 1103. Staff's recommendations here is to authorize staff on behalf of the board to submit amendments to Texas Administrative Code Sections 157.17 and 157.18 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for proposal. And I'm available for any questions.
Any questions for Ms. Santos?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve staff's recommendations.
I will second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Ms. Robinson. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Agenda item number 18 is on page 83 in our materials.
Agenda item number 18, discussion and possible action to propose amendments to Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 157, Section 157.25, temporary suspension. Again, quadrennial rule review. We're proposing amendments to make our abbreviations for SOAS, I think specifically, consistent throughout the chapter. Staff's recommendation is to authorize staff on behalf of this board to submit amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code 157.25 as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register.
Any questions for Ms. Santos?
Madam Chair, I move that the board approve staff's recommendations.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Mr. Bolton. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. Takes us to agenda item number 19, which is on page 86 in our materials.
All right. Discussion and possible action to propose amendments to Texas Administrative Code, Section 157.31, investigative conference. Here are the amendments before you. They clarify the timing of when an acknowledgement form could be submitted to during the investigative conference process. Staff's recommendations here is to authorize staff on behalf of the board to submit amendments to 22 Texas Administrative Code, Section 157.31, as presented for publication and public comment to the Texas Register, along with any technical or non-substantive changes as required for proposal.
Madam Chair,
Mr.
I move
McInerney.
that we approve the proposed amendment on Administrative Code Subchapter 157.31 as presented.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. McAnally and a second by Mr. Bolton. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you, Ms. Santos. This takes us to pending business. Agenda item number 20. Discussion and possible action about our budget, our administration policy, and our investment policy. This was sent under separate cover. Ms. Williams.
Good morning, Madam Chair and Board. Agenda item 20, discussion and possible action regarding the 2025 draft budget, financial administration policy, and investment policy. As Chair Oates mentioned, the materials were sent under separate cover and not included in the public meeting materials. So the Budget Committee has met twice since the full board has met. So we met July 9th and again on August 6th to review the progress of the second draft of the budget, to refine the policy language in both the budget and financial administration policy, as well as the investment policy. If you recall, there was a lot of discussion at the last meeting regarding the policy language. And so before we get to the actual budget, I wanted to start with the budget and financial administration policy to go over the changes that staff recommended. So Executive Director Buckles mentioned that we would now be transitioning or proposing a transition from a 3-month reserve to a 12-month reserve. And so that change is reflected on page 2 of the Budget and Financial Administration Policy. And then more importantly, I think where we have a lot of detail is in, what is this? Section 107 regarding the reserves. Here again, you can see that we increased the reserve from, it says 6 months, which again was an inconsistency in our policy language. One section had 6, another section had 3. So we're changing it to be consistent to reflect 12 months of the current budget estimated operating expenses. And then in section 107C, the adjustment to the reserve level, we increased, added some language in there that just basically says that we're going to watch the reserve amount. It's going to be set each year in conjunction with the budget. Any funds remaining are considered unreserved funds and can be used for the current or future operations, and this is going to be shown as our available balance. The board must minimize the excess fund balance, and when the year-end fund balances exceed the total of the operations and contingency reserve by more than 20% for 2 consecutive years, staff must offer recommendations to reduce the excess in a responsible and sustainable manner over a 2-year period. If the reserve account falls below the prescribed level, the board shall create a plan to replenish the account balance over a period not to exceed 2 years. Do we have any questions or discussion regarding the budget and financial administration policy, or would you like me to continue?
I have some questions. So on 107A5 is new. It says, this is for reserves, amounts for a specific purpose by a decision and vote of the board to fund a new or expand an existing program under the board. I thought that reserves were only meant to fund one-time items, that they couldn't, I don't know if that's the word, but aren't for any kind of recurring item. And the way that's worded sounds to me like we're funding a new program or we're expanding an existing program, which sounds like those are recurring. Am I?
So not necessarily. Like if you recall to when we had the education reserve, the education reserve was something that was ongoing and we could fund ongoing recurring expenses for that particular purpose. It's a finite purpose. You define what that purpose is. You define what that time length is. So if we're going to fund any of these additional recommendations or put something else new in place, that's what that could be used for, but with more structure and terms and time limits and things of that nature.
So reserves can be used for something that's kind of a year over year expense?
That's not the intent. As you mentioned, it is intended to fund something that's a one-time, but it can be to get something started, and then we put it in the budget, and then it's a budgeted thing.
So could we put?
So using my term, it would be a new initiative. We could plant the seed money, but if it were to be an annual occurring item, then we would have to find the resources within our general revenues to fund that program, whatever it may be.
Yeah, that's correct. So as we do the annual budget review as part of our normal process that we do anyway as a committee, if we see that that is an expense that's going to be recurring, then that becomes one of the things we look at as part of the annual budget review. And if the funds, if we have funds available to continue that recurring expense, we do so, or we recommend it to the board to review that. If not, then we make that decision at that time during the annual budget review, if it's something we need to continue or not. So yeah, the intent is not to use that time over time. The intent is to maybe plant that seed. That's a good way to put it. And then annual reviews for budgeting will incorporate that.
It makes me just uncomfortable in the sense of if we're planting a seed, then we're expecting it to be recurring. And so then we're sort of, by using those funds, forcing the expenditure in the following year. So I just want to make sure that maybe we add something to that limits it as a one-time expense. I don't know what the wording would be, but something that
Let me think through that. And you have an example maybe in mind that would fit into that, so I can kind of think through how we can.
So let's say we go, let's use the reserve to offer education to the enforcement department. And then the next year we say, oh, well, now we have to move it out of a reserve expense and into our budget, which is really where it should have been the whole time, if we're anticipating it to be a recurrence.
Well, I think when we think in terms of the reserve, that's something that we fall on when it's absolutely needed in an emergency situation and our budget does not account for it. If we're talking about something like that in particular, that would be something that's that would be more of a budgeted item. That's not an emergency situation that would cause for us to pull from the reserve in most cases, unless it's something like, hey, the laws have changed or something where we have to implement it right away. But in that particular case of training, I don't anticipate we would use our reserve for that, because the reserve is actually for more pressing emergency situations where we're running out of money and we need to tap into that.
Sure, so maybe it's the word program, because program in my mind sounds like something that's not a one-time expense. So maybe that's what I'm getting hung up on, but I just want to make sure that that's not the intent.
One note is that it would only be an expense, program or otherwise, that was voted on by the board. So it would be like a mid-year change to the budget that we don't have funding for other than through the reserves. So it would have to be something that you expressly decide mid-year. I think this is important enough to pull from reserves and that we in future years will then budget for.
Like when we took on the contract reviewer, something like that might have been mid-cycle. Okay.
If we needed to do something with Pyrea that would cost money, but we didn't know about it until mid-year. I mean, just something that is a passion of the board, that's important to the board, but it would have to be a decision of the 9 of you, and then you would just need to find the funding for it. And essentially by putting a year in reserves, that is our savings account. So it would be, this is worthy of tapping into our savings account and then finding the budget for it on a regular occurrence.
That's an excellent way to describe it and explain it. Thank you for that, Executive Director. And keep in mind that in that situation, it is a board vote. So it is not anything that we would just, that the Executive Director would just pull. It would be something that would be important enough to the entire board that we would vote on that before it happens.
Sure. But also, I think if we set something in policy in 4 years from now, we say, oh, remember, we have that in policy that we can just take that money. So I don't want the intent to be lost. Even though it is something that can be voted on, if we put it in policy, then that sort of gives the permission for it to happen. But I think I'm fine with the wording if that's the parameters, that it's not something that is.
Madam Chair,
Please.
at the first budget meeting which I attended, the discussion around that was to give some flexibility with those funds that were, if necessary. And, if it is something that needs to sustain for a short period of time versus a static purchase. And just, at least my thought is that gives it the board some flexibility in how those funds could be used.
One more thought I wanted to just mention. By changing your reserve amount from 3 months to a year, you're basically encumbering this larger amount of money and naming it for a specific purpose, the purpose being a reserve. So when you do that, it's also important to broaden the definition of reserve so that you can use that money flexibly, but you decide. So I think part of it was to define reserve in such a way that you could use it if you needed it for a variety of ways, because it's more money going to that pot, if you will.
And prior to that, the policy was quite restrictive in how we could use it. And so I think that's, as a committee and when we met, that's why we went broader, because it was very specific before, where we were kind of pigeonholed on how we could use it. So the intent was to be able to expand it to other things as needed for the agency.
Okay. Any other questions on that? So then the next change is under B, from 6 to 12 months of current budget. And so I noticed on our budget, that brings us from, we were previously at about 800,000 and now we're at 2.5 million in the reserve.
Yes, that would be correct, ma'am. To be in line with 1 year of our estimated operating expenses.
I am strongly opposed to this change. I think by most accounting standards that I have looked up, 12 months is really for an organization that is high risk, and I don't feel like our income, our revenue is high risk. We don't have one big employer that might close down the factory in our city, and we don't have suddenly they are going to change federal law as far as appraisers are concerned, or if we have a natural disaster, it doesn't take out all, we don't, the appraisers maybe are deferred making their application payments, but they're not forgiven. So I just don't see, I think at a time when the conversation is about government spending and government waste and hoarding taxpayer money, I don't know that we have a good reason that our agency is high risk enough to need 12 months of reserves as opposed to 6.
I think that's a great point you bring up, and I'll go back to our most recent committee meeting. I think Mr. McAnally made an excellent point that we are an agency that we cannot go back to legislation asking for appropriated funding. We are ran as a business, really, where we make revenue and we have expenses and we're kind of on our own in that sense. So that was one of the reasons that we, as a committee, discussed that option to increase the reserve to that amount, is because we don't have the we don't have the option to go back and ask for additional funding. So that's why we looked at it that way. But of course, it's a board decision. So we are totally open to any alternative perspectives from taking it from 12 to a different amount. However, 3 months is not sufficient.
I agree.
Simply because we have to make do with what we make, and we don't have the option for additional funding.
Right, so 6 months would be about 2.5, something like that, somewhere in that range.
Correct.
I just wanted to say that we're a state that has legislature every 2 years. A legislature could come in and change everything. So you want to have enough backup that you can keep it sufficiently running until you can accommodate any of the new laws. And I think it's really important to have at least 9 to 12 months.
I agree. Thank you, Ms.
Any other discussion? Very good. Then we will move on to C. The wording on this really threw me off.
Okay.
So I kind of wasn't sure what the 2 consecutive years and the 2-year period, what was sort of the intent of this?
Well, the intent of that, ma'am, is to allow us time to watch and see what's happening. And if we have a situation where our fund balances are extremely high for 2 consecutive periods, then that's the time when we need to take a look and say, okay, maybe it's time for us to make this change and pivot, as opposed to just seeing in an even year, oh, well, we have a lot of money. In the odd years, we don't. And so give us an opportunity to watch it and then make the necessary steps to make changes.
And just to remind the board that our revenue does come in cycles, so it is every other year that we get the big bump in revenue from AMC versus the alternative year where we do not.
Right.
And so that will give us an opportunity to monitor it over 2 years when we know that our revenue is going to change significantly based on that change in our revenue cycle.
Okay, I think that makes sense. So earlier, the executive director, I thought you said 20% of salaries, but it's really of the whole of.
I think it's
of our 20%. What 20% of?
When the year-end fund balances exceed the total of the operations and contingency reserve by more than 20%. So if
The reserves by 20%.
Yes, ma'am.
Right. Okay.
And that language didn't change. That was in there previously. It was just for 2 consecutive years.
So by having the larger reserve, the 20% obviously is a much larger figure as well.
Yeah.
basically 20% of annual budget.
Right. Okay.
So if we changed the duration of the reserve, whether it be 6 months, whether it be 9 to 12 months, or 9 months, doesn't that kind of bring back into play sustainable fee reductions?
And you should have data in your materials that we can toggle and you can kind of work on the math on what you could afford based on how much you have in
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that's going to have an impact there.
Directly.
Yes. So I just wanted to point that out.
That's a great point, Chance, and the staff did an excellent job when they presented the recommendations to the committee on both of our meetings prior to this meeting. One of the things that they have presented to the committee was a very detailed report on what fee reductions will look like and the sustainability over time of what that would look like. And so that is part of the material to consider. But yes, if we were to modify the amount of months we have in our reserve, then yes, that does give us a bigger pot to look at alternative ways of spending that down, the excess. Fee reductions may be one of those options. But as I brought up in our last meeting in August, which was a follow-up to the meeting you attended, when I think of fee reductions for our license holders, I am not opposed to that, but I do think that that is a bigger conversation that as a board we need to address when it comes to barriers to entry to our field. So fee reduction is one of those options that we can look at as how do we reduce the barriers of entry.
Well, the way I look at it is it's excess cash, and in a time where particularly appraisers are having a hard time, if we have an opportunity as a board to give them some relief, then I think that we should do it.
Any other discussion? I really don't like that we have taken out the language for sustainable fee reductions, just because I think that the intent of it looks, whether it's still on the list, obviously, but to specifically strike that, I don't know, it sends a message, I think.
Do you think it would be appropriate to put what we already have and comma, including fee reductions? That way it still opens us to the opportunity to use it more broadly, but we are still making a commitment to our license holders that we are not forgetting about them in that way.
I think that, yeah, I think
So perhaps
including.
that's a change we can put on.
I think that could work. The other part of that, though, too, and again, staff did an excellent job that we haven't gone into yet, but just doing a fee reduction is not sustainable.
Absolutely.
And it shows up in the numbers. You'll see quickly on that. Now, I know we were talking about the here and now, but I'm just talking about in the May meeting, it was talked about, is this going to be sustainable, yes or no, or what? And no one was ready to diagram that out. It's diagrammed out now. And that's...
Well, it's diagrammed out with, at a specific amount of money in the reserve fund. If that's modified, that's going to change the equation.
Yes.
And I'm just saying that since it is our existing policy, we should look at that, and we should try to provide some relief in an industry that is struggling right now. So.
But is it not sustainable because our expenses are what they are? How do other states operate their departments with fees in the 200 to 300 and ours are over 600, is that then should we be looking at what are our expenses?
Well, yes, well, you can always look at your expenses. That's what the Budget Committee does every year. And we've had extensive conversations about how you look at that and what is the even, talking about odd years, even years, and fluctuations, and try to smooth those out. But the thing about it is the fee amounts that we have to charge is also contingent on the population of appraisers that we have to pay that versus what the other agency may be able to charge $200 or $300 because they have twice as many payers or 3 times as many. I don't know.
I think only California has more appraisers than Texas.
Well, I'm talking about like licensed plumbers and electricians and
Or that
other
they receive
occupations.
appropriations. Or that they
That is a
receive
good point.
appropriations, that they're subsidized by another form of.
True.
Which we're not in that case.
Correct.
That's a good point. And I do think that we need to look at how do we take care of our license holders and how do we help them from an economic standpoint. I am all for that 100%. We just have to do it in a responsible way that is not knee-jerk reaction, but more of a way of, I think we owe it to the license holders to look at it in more detail. How do we help you as a whole? Fee reductions may be one thing, but that may not be something we can do year over year, but what can we do for our license holders as a whole to make things easier for them? So that to me is a much bigger conversation that would have more of an impact to the industry if we're not just saying, hey, let's do fee reductions one year, but let's have a true conversation, put it on the agenda as a board. That's something we need to address, is how do we make it better for the license holder as a whole, moving forward, not just this budgeting year, but how do we make it better for them moving forward? It's not just a fee reduction, I think. I think it's more things we can do to help them. And that is something that I would like for us to continue to look at as a board on our agenda items moving forward.
I think that's good, and I think we should have the discussion. But I just want people to keep in mind, I mean, the license holders are essentially the taxpayers. And if we have money that we've collected from the taxpayers that's in excess of what we need, then I believe it should go back to the taxpayers.
And I think where that conversation needs to begin is at what level of reserve as a board would we like to vote on? Because that number, that month that we choose has a huge impact to how we can even make a decision on fees, on returning the fees. And so at this point, we've recommended as a committee to do 12 months. That puts us at a certain overage where we've ran the numbers and it's not sustainable for fee reductions right now. As a board, that's why we have all of us here, and I think everyone has great opinions and perspectives on this issue. If we choose to do 9 months, that's great that we vote on that as a board, and then we rerun the numbers, and then we see where we stand financially. But as it stands right now, until the board makes a decision on how many months of reserve we need as an agency, we can't even really have we can't make a decision on fee schedules at all, because that is completely contingent upon the months that we have as a reserve. So I think we start there. And then if we need to take it back to the committee, happy to do that. And one thing too to keep in mind, we are at the budget approval cycle time for our agency. But keep in mind, as a board, we can amend this at any point. 3-6 months from now, whatever it is, we can come back and make an amendment to this. So what we vote on today, however we choose to vote, it's not set in stone necessarily, and just know that you do have the option to come back. Or we also have the option to say, hey, let's do 6 months or let's do 9 months. Ms. Williams, please rerun the numbers, bring that back to us, and then we vote on it at that time, once we actually see where we truly stand. But it starts first with deciding on the reserve amount.
Right.
So do we think that the best way to tackle this is to vote on the whole policy, or just on 107B, which is the 12 months? Maybe we vote on the whole package and just see where we're at.
I think that would be appropriate, and anyone that wants to make any changes or staff recommendations for changes, we can certainly account for that in the vote.
Can we add including sustainable fee reductions. Can we
Not a
just keep
problem.
that wording in there?
Not a problem.
Okay.
Already made the note.
So if we are going to vote, I would like to vote on that, the current version with that change. Right.
Okay, so do they need a?
There's not a motion yet.
Or anything right now for this? Or do we?
Madam Chair and Board, I make a motion to approve the presented recommendations for the investment policy as well as the budget and finance policy and the fiscal 2025 budget, with the exception of a change being added to the verbiage that we will include specific verbiage related to fee reduction in how we handle our reserve and the use of our reserves.
So we're tackling two of the items now, both the budget and financial policy, and you said also the investment policy. So those two different documents.
I'm making a motion to approve all three as presented with the exception of
The budget and the two policies?
The
We haven't gone through the budget yet.
my apologies. Let's do the motion for the policy changes. My apologies. I make a motion to approve the policy changes as recommended, with the exception of adding the section on fee reductions, as Chair Otis stated.
Can we clear that up? Just tell me again exactly what we're voting on. Are we voting on the 12 months and we're voting on?
So there's three items that we will be considering under this agenda item, and A, B, and C. A is the budget, B is the financial policy, and C is the investment policy. So we have a motion on
For the financial policy.
but it,
Yes.
just financial policy, not investment policy.
From my understanding, it was both
Both.
policies
It was both
with that,
policies.
with that change to the language regarding
Yes.
sustainable fees. I believe
But the
that is-
change to the language only applies to the finance policy. However, I am making the motion to approve both policies as recommended with your suggestion to, which I think is a great suggestion, to add the fee reductions to that verbiage. But we are voting on both policies, the finance and the investment policy.
Does someone want to second it before we open it for discussion?
Second.
So to be clear, the only change in the investment policy is the same change that's in the finance and budget policy, which is the 12 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months.
Yes, ma'am.
So that's the only change in that policy.
Yes, ma'am.
We didn't talk about that, but that's the only change for everybody's edification.
6 to 12.
So the language is consistent between the two policies. So if one changes from 6 to 12, the other one changes to 6 to 12 as well. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Oh, we might have to take a voice. Okay. Ms. Robinson? How do you vote?
Yay.
Ms. Sprinkle?
Yay.
Mr. McAnally?
Yay.
Ms. Reed Lynch?
No.
Mr. Castro?
No.
Ms. Escalante Castillo? Mr. Bolton?
No.
Mr. Eichelberg?
No.
And it's a no for me as well. So the motion fails. Okay. We need to make some sort of change to this, so let's go at it again. Any,
For the ones that voted no, I'd like to know exactly what type of reserve, because I believe perhaps we're stuck on the reserve language, which is totally fine. If there's other language, please let us know as a committee. But I would like to know specifically what are your preferences for the reserve, so we can have that documented and address that.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
To help clarify that? So, I understand the idea of going to a 12-month reserve, but, jumping from 6 to 12 directly, kind of how did we land on 6 months previously, and now all of a sudden it's 12?
That's a great question. I think this
let me pause everybody real quick. just to put on the record that Ms. Sprinkle had to leave and Ms. Escalante Castillo also has to leave.
And staff can certainly speak to this, but that was prior to my time on the committee. And from my understanding, that could have been set during our sunset 7 years ago, I believe, but you all would have to help me out on that in terms of how that particular month was chosen, 6 months at the time.
Again, that's, Tony, I don't know if you have that historical context.
I don't think any of us have the institutional knowledge on when it was set to 6. There's one place it was 6, one place it was 3. So it was inconsistent.
Yeah, and I think our policy has not always been a public document. Is that correct? Because I think when I went back to look to try and figure out the origin of it as well, I found it dead-ended.
Right. We in practice have used 3. We also, so then Sunset came along, and both TREC and the board added this 20% language to the carryover balance. And that was really because there was a huge criticism around saving money for a building. And so the thought was that you needed to be more responsible with the funds that we were managing. So on the board side, we've always had a carryover of more than 20%. Like, we've always been out of compliance with that provision. But we have used that carryover as kind of a flexibility for down years, kind of a second tier savings account. The reserve was for more like emergencies. So by managing the carryover and by putting that at 20%, the thought of increasing is that we would really use the reserve account more like a savings account and keep our carryover extremely low. So it's kind of changing the way that we're thinking about those things. So I don't know, that didn't answer your question about when, but that's some of the history.
And would you, and again, I'll pose the question for those of you that had concerns with that, if you could let us know what your thoughts are in terms of what the reserve number should be in terms of the months.
I had one other thing I just wanted to throw out there. Part of the research that we provided in the to the budget committee was what other SDSI agencies have in reserve. It's a little bit hard to figure out because each agency reserves funds differently. They define their reserves differently. They have it's just not consistent. But all of them, I believe with one exception that we couldn't find data on, had at least a year's cash in reserve and named different things, but available should they need it.
Which is a great point, because that way we are comparing apples to apples in terms of the types of agencies that fit our mold, what they are doing versus what we are doing. And that was great information the staff did provide through their research, was that other agencies in our case that are not getting funding from legislation, they actually have 12 months of reserve as a common practice. But again, I'll pose the question, what should the month be? Because that's going to determine everything else in terms of the budget.
I don't think we can answer that here. At least I've heard compelling reasons for all of them. And I'll admit, I was in that first budget meeting, I think I was the one that said, okay, 12 months.
Yes.
That sounds good.
Yes.
But again, I agree with you, Madam Chair, that this is a stable agency. I mean, and we have people that rely on that license to make a living, so they are going to fund this agency. And if I got to choose what we do next, it's probably to go back and have further discussion about it and see if we can all come to a consensus or at least a majority. before we move forward with all this.
And I think that's what we do as a board, because I think when we isolate it just to the committee, we've made our recommendations.
Yeah, no.
And so at this point, it's up to the board to be able to decide how many months of reserve. Because if we take it back to the committee, we've already agreed that 12 months is
Yeah, no.
sufficient.
I'm saying we need to, as a board, discuss this further. But I mean, I'm just going to be frank, I'm not going to vote for this today.
And that's okay, but I'm asking, what would you vote for and what would make you comfortable?
I don't think we have the answer yet.
And then
So
what?
you're saying no change on that, so it would remain at 6? I mean, there has to be a word in there.
It makes a lot of sense to me, honestly, but I'm thinking off the cuff here.
Sure.
Yeah.
So
And we've got time to, and that's why we wanted to bring it to the board, because it is a very important decision that we need all board members to partake in. So that's why I'm asking, well, what would we be comfortable with?
Yeah.
And if we're not comfortable, what information do we need the staff to provide us as a board in order for us to be comfortable? Because we have to make a decision, whether we take out the 12 months, whether we go to the 6 months, whatever it is, as a board, we have to decide something. And so if we're lacking information from the staff, what specific information would you like for them to provide so that we can make a decision as a board?
Yeah, I sort of found in my research, there's some organization like the finance people for government agencies or something, and there was an actual document called Rethinking Reserves, and it was like how you should look at the risk of your organization, which is what got me thinking about, okay, our license holders work really hard to get their licenses, much like doctors or lawyers, where they're not going to let it lapse because they've invested too much into it. So it's not like Trek when housing is great, then there's a lot, and then they all drop out. We don't have that kind of thing. So ours doesn't fluctuate with the economy. I mean, we've seen that it has gotten better. We've gotten more license holders with the boom, but it's been fairly steady for a lot of years. So I couldn't find any risk factors that were making us our revenue sources more risky than above average risk, I guess. Really below average, I would argue.
Madam Chair, I guess.
The thing that I need is, I think 6 months makes a lot of sense to me.
Okay.
And then, so the information that I think we need is, and I realize I may be in a minority view here, but how can, with that 6-month fund, how can we sustainably reduce fees?
Okay, so that's 6 months. Thank you for that. And for the other nays, what recommendations would you have?
6 for me as well.
Okay.
Mr. Castro? Sorry, Mr. McAnally, please. You've been waiting.
Well, I was just about to say, we can go out to outside sources, which sounds like some of you have done, to find those benchmarks. Again, and I'm just saying this for what the committee did. We tasked the staff to find out what our constituents, other SDSIs, were saving. Whether y'all are comfortable with 12 months or not, that's up to the board. But we actually started with a complete blank sheet of paper, because in the main meeting it was, this is not enough, we don't like this, we need to address it. So we went with it as a blank sheet of paper and found that 12 months was not atypical at all with other state agencies, and evidently they're at risk by their license holders just as much as we are. So that's where we were comfortable with this. Staff did a marvelous job of running all the scenarios under a 12-month. If I'm hearing, Stephanie, we may have to task staff again to say, what does 6 months look like? So Chance has that answer. We might have to look at 9 months, because Ms. Pringle here, she said that 9 to 12 months.
Yeah.
We already have the 12-month number, so we can take 2 more stair steps at it and say, what does this number tell us? What does it give us? If I may, when Doug was here and we first became SDSI, the decision was 3 months. Then I was off the board at the time when it went probably to 6 or something like that. But 3 was the starting point.
And 3 certainly is not enough to sustain an agency such as ours without any extra funding.
Yeah.
So We are still here, and that is true, but we are here at the hands of an amazing staff who's improved our efficiencies, who's done a lot of work, as well as our board direction. So, yeah, we are still here, but it's been a lot of hard work in order to maintain the numbers that we have.
And also, the numbers that we have are not 3 months either, so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, it's the 3 months plus, we're basically not following the policy about the 20%. So that is fine. But it's sort of if you follow the 20% and you only have 3 months, then, the differential between the odd years and the even years is pretty significant. So you want to at least account for that to be able to cover the years where your expenses are higher than your revenue. That happens every other year. So there's even some consistent.
But the percentage is only on the expenses, which is always fairly even. We're not talking about revenue. The fluctuation of revenue doesn't impact that 6 or 12 months figure.
The fluctuation of revenue would
because it's only on estimated operating expenses.
Yeah, in terms of what we would use a reserve
So our
for.
expenses are pretty level. So every year that 6 months will be roughly the same.
About the
of course,
same. No, I just
with
mean that
inflation.
you want enough cash in the bank to be able to cover those low years of revenue. And then some.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm hearing is perhaps the option to go back and look at 6 months as a reserve is what I'm hearing for the majority.
We have to vote on something today because we have to go into our fiscal year with a policy. So
Like if you were to vote on 6 months today or whatever you want it to be, then I think you could also vote on a budget and you could direct finance staff to just make the modifications of the different reserves and therefore the different carryovers. Some of those numbers would change, but I think you could estimate what those are if you want to vote on a budget today, which I would highly encourage you to do.
Yeah.
So just so I understand, so we can vote on the budget today. If we were to vote on it at a 6-month reserve, then we rerun the numbers and we redistribute that. And then at the next board meeting, I'm assuming at that time, we would look at recommendations on how to spend the money at that time, at the next board meeting. And I would encourage everyone to please look at the hard work from the staff. They have given us extensive recommendations on how we may be able to utilize those excess funds. And if we are going to move forward with the 6 months, that's going to increase that amount. But please look at all the recommendations because there were very good recommendations made by the staff. They did a lot of hard work and digging in order to come up with those. So although cutting fees is one of the things we looked at and analyzed quite closely, please take the time to go through all the recommendations.
Madam Chair.
Mr. McAnally.
Just to even simplify it a little bit more, unless I'm missing something, can we just vote for the budget today for the 25 and let the investment policies and all this stay the same as for the time being until we meet again, which I guess would be November?
The budget is, one number in the budget is tied to the budget policy.
And investment policy.
Is that something that we can clean up once we have?
Well, I guess when we vote on the budget, we could vote on it with that one item changing.
If we were to not make any changes to the policy, the reserve would be 6 months according to this. And then we could incorporate the 6-month reserve into the budget. So we, in essence, could vote to not change anything with the policies today and leave that language the same. And then I go back and I make those changes to the budget to reflect a 6-month reserve.
And that would be the only change?
Yes, ma'am.
To the budget, right? Okay. So essentially, we would be voting on keeping the budget policy the way it is today, rejecting all of the changes that are in it now. Is that what we want to do?
I don't think so. Well, it's a board decision, but that would not be my preference.
Okay, what would be your preference?
I think since we're somewhat hung up on the reserve number, and again, that drives all the rest of the recommendations.
Right.
I think we need to address that specifically, and the rest of the language I'm quite comfortable with. Any other changes that were recommended by the staff, our committee was completely comfortable with.
Okay.
I think what it sounds like is that the issue is going to be the 12 months, and so we need to vote on that, would be my opinion and my recommendation, and let the rest of the language stay, if that's what the board chooses.
So would it be better for us to first vote on the months as a separate item, and then vote on 107A and 107C separately?
Perfectly fine.
I think, okay.
Because I think that you probably have, there's probably support for A and C. So, but does B, if we left B, if the vote was to leave B at 6 months, does that change what the recommendation is for C?
For the investment policy?
No, see the last paragraph in this.
The only change would be the strikeout on the months. So if we say as a board.
But the next paragraph with all the underlining and all of that, does any of that change if we're doing it?
No.
Do you think that it does, Ms. Williams? Do you think that changing that changes any of this other language? The 2 years, the 2 consecutive years, the 2-year period?
I'm going to defer to general counsel on this.
Are you saying, I mean, it doesn't have to change. I mean, it's truly, I mean, I think the recommendation is maybe take each one of these changes individually.
Okay.
If we want to find that consensus, maybe it's the best to figure out what is the month. Let's move to the next paragraph.
Yeah, okay. I just wasn't sure if we vote on B and leave it at 6 months, if now we've sort of written the opposite in C. I just, that language is unclear to me to that extent.
We didn't write the opposite, I don't think, in C. I think it's just the months that would change. However, the 2-year evaluation or assessment and all that would stay. So all the review of the 2 years and all of that, everything would stay.
Right, the remaining funds are considered unreserved funds that can be used for current and future operations. That doesn't change.
No.
This is shown as an available fund balance. That doesn't change.
So that verb.
When year-end fund balance exceeds the total of operation and contingency reserves by more than 20% for 2 consecutive years, that's still fine.
That stays fine.
Right?
Correct.
That doesn't change. Yeah, okay. So
it's
I
just
think
the number of months that we're changing.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I would like to point out, we did talk about retaining fee reductions in.
Very good point. So would you like to make a motion with the changes to B, 6 months, and C, sustainable fee reductions?
Well, my motion would be that we retain the 6 months against the staff's recommendation.
This is, I'm sorry, just to clarify, so before we vote on that, are you specifically talking about budget, including the budget presented, as well as the finance policy and investment policy, changing that to 6 months? Because it's all kind of tied together.
Yeah, no, I get that. My motion is that the operations and contingencies reserve should total 6 months of the current budget's estimated operating expenses.
So we will take item B as an independent item, and a motion is on the table for 107B to retain 6 months as opposed to 12. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
I believe the ayes have it. It will stay at 6 months. Is that everyone, was that the reading?
It wasn't very clear to me who said aye. So
Okay,
could we do
very
it?
good. Not a problem. On that motion, Mr. Eichelberger. Mr. Bolton.
Aye.
Mr. Castro.
Aye.
Ms. Reed Lynch.
Aye.
It's an aye for me. And Mr. McAnally, Ms. Robinson.
Nay.
The ayes have it. It will remain at 6 months. Perhaps we should go to 107A. We'll take that one independently as well. Well, I think we can, I mean, whoever wants to make the motion, I think we can do A and C together. If someone wants to make that motion with the change of sustainable fee reductions.
Right, the changes, that fee reduction stays in there.
Or, right.
I'm sorry, can you clarify?
That 107A5, the addition of 107A5 and 107C, those two paragraphs, those changes, but we will leave in the language about sustainable fee reductions.
Including sustainable fee.
Including
Sustainable fee reduction.
Including possible, including.
I make that motion.
I second it.
Is that appropriate?
It's in the record.
It is. Very good. We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by, who was the second?
I was.
Ms. Reed Lynch.
Are we, for clarification,
Yes, sir.
are we on section 104A?
107.
107.
107.
Well, there's a 104A that also has a suggested change
Is that in the finance policy?
in the annual budget.
Yes. That was correcting that inconsistency where it said 3 months on one page, 6 months on another page. So yes, he is correct. Section 104A.
It's the first time I've seen that.
Oh, she covered it?
No, I'm,
Oh, okay. Well, I just bring that up because I didn't want us to leave it.
Thank you.
But, yeah.
and we also need to vote on the investment policy where it has the same language as well. Okay, so we should probably hold an independent vote for 104A.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I move that Section 104A contain 6 months in the paragraph.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Mr. Eichelberger. We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Mr. Eichelberger. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Okay.
The ayes have it. 104A. Okay, so now we go back to 107. Thank you for bringing that to our attention, Mr. McAnally. Okay, now we have 107A and C.
Thought they just did that.
We just voted on 104.
Yeah. If anyone would like to make a motion regarding 107A and 107C,
Madam Chair,
Mr. McAnally.
I move that we accept the proposed changes as presented in items 10, in Part A and Part C, excuse me.
Sorry to interrupt. I think
C,
you just previously, before you made the change to 104, you did vote on those changes to 10.
When I made the motion, is that what you're referring to?
No, the motion that you just made, I believe we already went through that and voted that just
Did we?
before the 104.
That was the one that he said what she said, and that's what we voted.
Okay.
Okay,
But
I
we were-
apologize.
The only
I
thing
just
that
wanna
I'm
be
aware of that
clear.
we voted in 107 is the 12 months in B. But we still have A and C still left
Miss-
to do.
Let's do it again so it's clear.
And let me just clear this up. On C, we're going to include the
Yeah, okay.
sustainable.
Okay.
All right, Mr. McAnally,
Okay.
would you like to?
No. We can let it die for lack of a second.
It died for lack of a second.
I make
Mr. Bolton.
Motion that we include the recommended additions and subtractions to subparagraph A and C of 107 with the inclusion in C of including fee reductions.
I second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Ms. Reed Lynch. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion passes. We need to tackle the investment policy, which only has one change.
Yes, that is correct. That is in section 2.10 where it references the 12 months. So you can reject that and leave it as the 6 months.
So for consistency with the other 2.10A has a proposed change to 12 months from 6 months that we need to vote on.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Bolton.
I move that we retain 6 months from that section, excuse me.
On the investment policy, very good. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Bolton and a second by Mr. Eichelberger. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it. Moving on to budget.
Absolutely not. So we do have a budget before you, but seeing how we are going to make some changes, the numbers are not relevant until we revise those numbers for you. But we do have projections and some changes and some highlights that I just want to talk about. So one of the highlights were that we incorporated the 1 year of reserve, but that's now going to change to 6 month. We did include the 3-month merit in the salary and wages for all employees. And then, of course, the information that I had about our potential estimated carryover, that's going to change because of the adjustments that I'm going to have to do.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Does this budget include the changes that are proposed to the MOU?
Yes.
So the only change is the one.
Only the ones to account for the change between the recording secretary. So the recording secretary was 40% TALCB. We distributed her duties between 2 current staff member at 30% each. So there is a budget effect to the board.
What's that account for? How much money are we talking about?
How much money? It's, I believe it's
11, 15, something like that, right?
It's about 20,000 a year. If I can get to that talking point, I'm presenting that to you exactly next, after the budget, I believe. But it's about
Yeah, we probably should have done.
$1,700 a month, or $20,411 every year. I think that's probably a more accurate reflection of how the distribution of duties, but it's very hard to guess.
No, I get that. I mean, my concern is that as a steward of this agency, I don't want to increase our expenses that we don't have to, is one thing. I do think that whatever the threshold is, that it makes a difference, which I don't know what that is, but I don't think it's $20,000. So I'm fine with that. I just don't like the concept.
And I think we did that because of the significant loss we had and the need for other staff members to pick up where we had a hole in our staffing.
Don't disagree with that.
Yeah, and so my opinion is that it's a fair contribution to Trek's, to what Trek is paying.
I understand that, but I'm not beholden to Trek. I'm beholden to this agency. And so I understand the plight of Trek, but that's...
Oh, I'm not worried about the plight of Trek. What I'm saying is the staff that we are utilizing from their team, in my opinion, we should cover our use of that.
Now, you'll remember that I proposed additional changes to the MOU. Those are not, they are not in this budget, and they're not proposed changes today.
Okay.
Correct.
The 20,000 we're paying is because they're doing our work, not Trek's. So I wouldn't worry about Trek.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Okay.
Speaking of, I assume it's fine for us to vote on the budget and then the MOU? Yeah, I mean, it's a negligible amount of. Were there any other highlights that you had for us, Ms. Williams?
At the end of your document, that's where you would see the fund balance reduction recommendations. So as Ms. Robinson stated, we did put together some recommendations to present to the board to consider ways to reduce the available fund balance to include a fee reduction. And that analysis is included, but it sounds like today we're not.
Well, I do think what's important about those recommendations is that it was pretty significant. How many recommendations did the staff provide for us?
7, 8, 9, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
So, and we thank you guys for that, because we know that each of those recommendations that you provided, you had to do full analysis in order to do so.
Yeah,
So
and I
that is a
think-
lot of work.
And hopefully we can carry those forward, as we know that that amount will increase. And so hopefully we can implement more of those than.
And yeah, that's once we see what the revised numbers look like, we can definitely look at those recommendations at that time to make a decision on
Does
what we choose.
this budget, because it was sort of up in the air about that we might devote more resources to audits, is that reflected in this budget, or we would have to pull that from?
It is not
Okay.
reflected in the budget. It's reflected as a recommendation for
Okay.
operational contracts. So to allow the budget, the TLCB to contribute financially to operational contracts that have historically been funded by TREC, will TLCB receive the direct benefit or is requesting a modification? Examples to include, but are not limited to, the internal auditing services, the regulatory applications modernization project, et cetera. And then an estimated contribution amount is included. But again, that would be one of those recommendations.
Okay, yep.
Thank you for that. And again, it's a recommendation, not it's something that the board as a whole will vote on. So just know that it is a recommendation, so we all have our piece in saying how we feel about that.
Is there anything else on this budget that you would like to highlight for us, Ms. Robinson?
I think the staff has done an outstanding job in presenting the information and doing the research that we've asked them to do, and providing the recommendations we've asked them to provide, crunching the numbers backwards and forwards, which we appreciate. So I nothing in particular at this time. I think, if we call for a motion, I think it would be to a motion to vote on the budget so that we have an actual vote, but knowing that we have an opportunity to amend that if we need to do so, which I imagine we will, we possibly will, once we know what the actual reserve amount is going to be and once the numbers are reran.
The license fees revenue of 1783, has that been adjusted since, we budgeted for 2024 at 1813 and we're at 1706 this was as of August 6th. So it looks like we may hit that. We might come in right under. I'm not sure what that figure is, but we have seen a slight dip in total license holders in the last 6 months or so.
That is
year. So I want to make sure that I'm not asking that it be revised. I'm just asking, how long has that number been like that, and was it adjusted with our recent sort of dip?
Yes, ma'am. So the numbers that you see before you today are revised numbers that we put together in July. So you had the numbers from May, and then we took the data through the end of June to comprise the data as of July. So our approved budget for 2024 included 1.8 million is what we thought we collect. We're now looking like it'll be closer to 1.7 million. So that's where you see that decrease.
Very good. Does anyone have any questions? So we would need to approve this budget there would be a change to the 2 lines of operating reserves and then the available fund balance based on what we voted on policy. That would be the only changes. Nothing to revenue or expenses. If anyone would like to make that motion.
So are we approving this budget, or voting on approving this budget, with a provision that there will be changes to it? Or are we just voting to approve this budget, period, and we know we're going to make some changes?
Oh, that's a good question.
Well, I think what we're doing is looking to approve the budget, and if the motion is recommended to approve the budget with adjusting the reserve to 6 months, then that is what we're voting on. So we would approve it, budget as is, as recommended, with the 6-month reserve as opposed to the 12. I think that's what we're voting on. And then the staff would redo the numbers so that we have what that final number looks like. I mean, that's a way to do it. But of course, it's up to how we decide to do it.
I think part of your question was, do you want to put an asterisk saying this will change, or do you want to just know that it will change?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out, which one we're voting on, because I like one and I don't like the other, so.
Sure. It probably is a distinction without a difference. You can change, you can vote to change the budget at any time.
Oh, okay.
So what you're doing today is not in stone. You can, in November, you relook at it, it can be before you again. We just need to know to bring it before you again. And we know we will bring proposals for a fee decrease.
So, but voting on the budget, we have an approved budget. That is set in stone. It's a snapshot in time that does not change. And so the way to accomplish that, much like with the budget policy, when we said, no, but we're going to leave in this language, all we have to say is, we're approving this budget with those two changes, so then the final copy will have those changes.
Correct.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
I think Mr. Bolton was just also kind of wanting to reserve the right for a fee decrease, so to like continue the budget discussion around that. Did I hear you right?
That's part of it, yes.
But the modifications to the reserve amount to those two lines that you mentioned will happen, and we will send that out to
And
y'all.
then that
for
will be
kind of
our final.
That would be the final budget, and then
And then the budget committee takes that and moves forward
with
that.
tweaking the recommendations, because the recommendations as presented, those numbers will change based on the new figures. And then in November, we can bring the voted upon budget, which would be the 6% if that's what the board votes on, with the revised recommendations, with the only revisions really being numerical revisions to show the different amounts that it's going to fluctuate. And then I think my suggestion would be in the November meeting, if we need to discuss the recommendations further, we can do that and even vote on if we want to adopt any of the recommendations, because that's what we would then call the amended budget at that time.
Right.
If that makes sense.
So could the motion be to accept this budget with the reserves and available fund balance revised as
Per the policy.
consistent with the approved policy?
I have maybe an option, is to just approve this budget, and then in new business, we propose to pass the revised budget.
I think if we approve this budget as is, it's not going to be consistent with the two motions you just put forth,
Yeah, the policy change.
which were the policy changes.
Yeah.
So if you're going to do it, go all the way with it, and then we can come back and
But
make the
I get what you're
revisions.
saying, but what I want to do is just make sure that we get an opportunity to look at these new numbers, and we get.
That's where we can amend it. As a board, at any point in the year, we have an opportunity to
And that's what I'm
amend it.
saying, in
Yeah.
new business, to be brought up in November,
Oh, in November. I thought you meant today.
we'll just say, we're going to
What was that
look at
accomplish?
amending
Review the
budget.
recommendations, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, of
yeah,
course.
we'll review the recommendations.
Okay.
I think what you've just done is speak to agenda item 29, future agenda items,
Now we have something to write down.
the budget. We're good.
New business. Would someone like to make the motion? Please?
Okay. I'll take a stab at it.
Please.
Okay, Madam Chair, we'd like to approve the budget with the changes from 12 months to 6 months reserve.
Very good. Do we have a second to that motion?
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Reed Lynch and a second by Mr. Eichelberger. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Nay.
The ayes have it. That will be our final budget that we will be able to look at in November. I want to say thank you to Ms. Robinson. I know that that was a lot of work on the Budget Committee's part, and I hope that the deliberative process doesn't take away from the hard work that you all put into it and the detail that you dialed in order to come forward with these recommendations. This is the way that I would like this board to work, that we have robust discussions, and sometimes we don't all agree. I think that's a healthy board. So I think that a small amount of discourse makes for a healthy board, and it shows that we are doing our job and being thoughtful about our roles.
Madam Chair, I'd like to add in, I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate each of the board members participating. It was professional, and you know, we all have differing opinions, and we can disagree and still work through these issues.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
So thanks, everybody.
And I would like to add, too, that I think it shows that we have respect for each and everyone here, including the staff, because we do realize how much work this is, and we revise our own budgets, you know, and I do respect everyone in this room.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Williams. This takes us to agenda item number 21, discussion and possible action over the MOU. This is on page 90 in our, is it on page 90?
Yes, ma'am, 91.
In our materials. Executive Director Buckholz.
Okay. I hope to not be standing here as long as Ms. Williams was standing here. Well done, Mrs. Williams.
I'm sorry.
Okay, beginning on page 91, you'll see draft changes to the MOU between the board and the commission to reflect the absorption of duties by 2 staff members upon the passing of Deanne Frederick. 2 staff will take on her duties at 30% each, compared to the 1 recording secretary position allocated at 40% for TALCB. So the reason for the change in these percentages, just as we talked about earlier, was really just to more realistically estimate the time spent on TALCB duties. This will mean a shift from the TREC budget to the TALCB budget of about $1,700 a month, or $20,400 annually, which should more accurately reflect that estimated time on board functions. I recommend that you approve the draft changes to the MOU as presented.
Madam Chair. Oh, I'm sorry. Better jump the gun.
Absolutely not. Did anyone have any questions for Executive Director? No. Ms. Robinson?
I move that the board approves staff's recommendations as drafted.
Second.
We have a motion by Ms. Robinson and a second by Mr. Bolton. Any further discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The motion carries. We have already tackled agenda item number 22. So it takes us to agenda item number 23, the report on the internal audits. These were sent, they were both sent under a separate cover. I believe Ms. Williams is speaking to these, am I? Page 96 in our materials is number 23, and 105 in our materials is 24.
So I'm here, basically, ma'am, just to answer any questions that you all may have regarding those reports, since McConnell and Jones is not here.
And so you all are aware, in the audit committee, we do go over the findings of these, and then they go in front of both TREC and the board at our next at these meetings after the audit committee looks at them. But if you have any questions pertaining to these audits, be happy to take them. Hearing no questions, this doesn't require a motion by the board. Thank you, Ms. Williams, again. We made that one easy. Agenda item number 25 is the discussion regarding the 2023 annual report of the appraisal subcommittee. This is on page 112 in our materials. And I just ask for this to be included every year when it comes out, because I just think that I'd like to make it part of our public record, as they are our federal agency, and this is the budget that they use for oversight with us, and so I just like to enter it into the record and every year give everyone an update on what their reserves are. And as Mr. DiBiasio alluded to earlier, we are now up to $33 million. And I sort of looked at our discipline actions compared to other states, didn't find anything that, I thought was notable about it. I will be glad to be on their list of excellent next year. They published the list of the states that were audited in, do they call it audit review, in 2023, so we will be in the, next year's report. Other than that, I didn't have anything to highlight for the board. So we can move on to agenda item number 26, the report on the ASC compliance review of both the Appraiser and our AMC regulatory programs. This is included in our materials on page 241, and Director Tran.
Madam Chair, members of the board, good afternoon. Just a quick report on the 2024 AAC compliance review. For background for the new members, the AAC conducts an audit of each state every 2 years of both the Appraiser and the AMC program to ensure that the states are in compliance with the AAC policy statements. States who do not comply are subject to additional oversight from the AAC. The review is risk-based, and states can receive one rating between poor and excellent. This was the first audit that we've had since the reorganization, so with enforcement and licensing coming under one division. The whole process lasted over several months and included significant document requests from the ASC. They came in person to our office in April, and they were here for a few days just going through all of our files. As Chelsea mentioned earlier, I'm happy to report that we received an excellent rating in both our Appraiser and AMC programs. I think this is pretty significant because this board made several changes over the past few years to reduce barriers to entry. We are 1 in 5 states that didn't have any requirements over the federal minimum. And with each of those changes, as Chair Oates mentioned, we were a little bit nervous that it was going to put us in compliance risk with the AAC, but somehow we managed to walk that fine line. So that is that report, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Great job. That was excellent.
Fantastic
That's
job.
Wonderful.
See, it can be done. Is this the first time the ASC has been back in person since the COVID, because they hadn't been in our offices in several cycles?
The last cycle, they skipped the compliance review. They did what was called the state offsite assessment. And so it was like a light audit, and they just asked for a few documents. But this is the first time that they came back.
Yeah, this was kind of the first deep dive since we've made all the changes. Yeah, that really thrills me to no end. So I certainly appreciate that. Any questions for Director Tran? If not, we can move on to agenda item number 27, the report on the application of the ASC grant funds.
Okay, so the AAC issued the notice of funding and availability for the grant funds in the beginning of 2024 in January. We submitted our grant application in June, which was the first date that we could do that. We asked for stipend money for aspiring appraisers to gain experience and for some technology enhancements. So initially, the AAC anticipated giving award letters out by August 15th, yesterday. That didn't happen. Well, that's not the update I was hoping to give you. I've been in contact with the grants office throughout this entire process, and the good news is that we've received verbal confirmation that we are getting an award. But of course, it's not official until we get it in writing. But it seems like we're in good shape. The last thing that I heard from the grants office is that we should be receiving that award letter in September.
And that was for the full 120,000?
For 3 years, yep.
For 3 years. Fantastic.
Yep. Can take any questions.
So we have a 0 on the budget for ASC grants, which I think is, prudent. So then that would just go in once it comes, it just comes in and I mean, I think we should always budget 0 because with the ASC,
But we'll be doing specific things with that grant funding that we wouldn't otherwise do.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you for staying on top of that, Director Tran. It's been a long process for this last round. Very good. We already did agenda item number 28, so that takes us on to agenda item number 29. Discussion and possible action regarding future meetings. I think we have the budget on there. Is there anything else?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'd like to add discussion on how to continue to strengthen our efforts to reduce the barrier to entry for our license holders.
Yes, ma'am.
So maybe if the staff can put together what we're currently doing, and we as a board can review that to see if there's any area that we can improve on to help our license holders.
Perfect. Anything else? Agenda item number 30 is our next meeting. So our next meeting is November 14th. I want to confirm that that still works for everyone. We are not having a workshop this year, so it's just the one day. And then the tentative February meeting is February 21st. Is that still good for everyone? So we will discuss, there's always an opportunity if something comes up, so that everyone knows.
Madam
You would
Chair.
just let, yes, sir.
So you, on the November meeting, the materials indicate the 15th, you said the 14th.
Did I?
Thank you. I was looking at that on my calendar, like, what?
I guess 12:30 is my cutoff time for making sense. Yeah, I wanted a workshop. Okay, so May, we can set a tentative date for May. Looking at the UT graduation, Mother's Day, all of those sorts of things, I think the 16th probably makes the most sense. It's not the Labor Day, Memorial Day weekend, and it's not Mother's Day and graduation. So we will put that down as a tentative date unless anyone disagrees. Or May. Wow, we're talking about May. If there is nothing else, nothing further, then the time is 12:59 and this meeting is adjourned.